dedicated family man.
He was the best grandpa I could ever ask for my kids.
He loved his family. He was always there for everyone.
And a pillar of the community.
He helped a lot of the people who were down on their luck.
He was changing everyone's life.
Is senselessly murdered.
We noticed what looked like burn marks.
Is this a torture type crime? Was he actually tortured?
Detectives follow a trail of evidence.
I noticed my dad's truck was gone.
We knew that this truck was a key to solving this homicide.
That reveals devastating betrayals.
Marty would employ people from drug rehab centers.
You look at him and you're thinking that if anybody could do it, this guy could do it.
Then a surprise lead reveals a killer no one imagined.
I told you guys everything I know.
No, you haven't. We're pretty excited. We're just about to go nuts. It was a moment, I'll say that.
I never thought he would do something like that.
He's not the guy I would have picked to have committed this crime.
I was in complete shock.
Ardmore, Oklahoma is an honest, hardworking town built on family values.
We're a town of about 25,000 people, and it's a wonderful community.
It's a great place to live because you can have that large town feel and then yet come home to the small town atmosphere as well.
On the evening of November 15th, 2019, that small town feeling is shattered when police respond to a 911 call.
I had just sat down to eat when the phone rang, and it was dispatch advising me that officers were out on a possible homicide.
Police are checking in on a local man who hasn't been seen or heard from in several days.
They arrived, immediately looked in the window, could see the victim was laying face down in the floor, and they could see blood, so they forced their way into the residence. They knew immediately that he was deceased.
Minutes later, homicide detectives arrive at the scene.
The living room was just in disarray. There was items kicked over. There was blood on the couch. There was blood spatter on nearby items in the living room, the TV, and pictures. And so we knew that there was a struggle that had taken place in that room.
When the detectives look at the body, they recognize the dead man.
I knew the victim. It was Marty Lucas. Most of the police officers knew who Marty was. Marty helped in the community. He helped a lot of the people who were down on their luck. Marty was a nice guy.
Detectives have to determine why 63-year-old Marty Lucas would be the target of such a heinous crime.
With the amount of trauma that Marty had suffered, it was a pretty violent, bloody scene.
You can see a lot of blood that has pooled around the body. You can see blood on the back of the body, on the head, and we knew that this was a death as a result of a beating or a blunt force trauma.
It's obvious that there was quite a struggle. Marty had hair in his hands. He had abrasions on his hands. I think he fought for his life. We noticed that there were pieces of what appeared to be a rock that had some moss on them. We found parts of it over by the couch where there was a large blood stain, and then parts of it over by him. We walked the exterior of the residence trying to find where maybe a rock would have come from. Immediately under the carport, there is a rock pathway. The walkway was missing a rock. So immediately we thought, well, whoever it was that did this took a rock from there and brought it with him. That indicated to us that this was premeditated.
And so we believe that he or she had used it as a weapon against Marty, and in the process of that, it was broken. We didn't find very large pieces of it, and so we believe that the majority of that rock was taken from the scene.
Police discover unusual markings on the body.
We noticed what looked like burn marks on his shirt, like his shirt had been ironed. My initial reaction was not only has he been hit by an iron, he's been burned by an iron.
Is this a torture type crime? Was he actually tortured? And so we believe maybe early on that the iron could have been a murder weapon, or at least an additional murder weapon in this case.
But what could have been the motive for such a violent attack?
Where his wallet would have been, someone had reached in and taken his wallet, because you could see the blood transfer, a handprint, like sliding down into his pants almost.
We were pretty clear that this was a crime involving a robbery and theft. His wallet was missing along with his phones.
Detectives make one more important observation.
We thought whoever had killed Marty knew him because there wasn't a sign of forced entry.
As investigators work, Marty's son Michael arrives at the scene.
I went to his house. It was a nightmare. It's the worst day of my life. I was in shock once I seen what was actually inside.
My husband called me. He said, my dad's dead. Someone killed him. And he was just screaming in my ear. He's like, I can't believe someone would kill my dad. I was in complete shock. He was such a nice person. Who would want to hurt him?
Marty Lucas was born into a military family in 1956. After graduating high school, Marty got married and had 2 children, Jennifer and Michael.
Michael and his dad were very, very close.
He loved his family. He was always there for everyone, you know. He made sure to make time for everyone. I used to call him Papa Smurf because he's just really funny. He's short. He's just a real, bubbly person. My parents, they divorced when I was pretty young.
Marty had struggles when my husband was a child and a teenager.
He had a substance abuse problem.
He had been in and out of trouble with the police, petty crimes that was a result of that addiction.
In 2007, Marty got a second chance when he was offered a job as a carpenter and found renewed purpose in life.
From then on, he straightened up and started his own business. Did really well.
He turned his life around. He was one of the few success stories that I'm aware of in my career.
Marty threw everything into rebuilding his life and his family.
He taught me a lot of work-related skills at an early age. He let me start working with him when I was 12 years old. And my son, he's 8. He's already starting working him, basically, showing him skills like he did me when I was young.
He was the best grandpa I could ever ask for my kids.
Marty never forgot the second chance he'd been given and vowed to pay it forward.
Marty would usually go to the halfway houses and get people that had just got out of jail or that have a hard time with their life and see if they would want to work for him.
Basically, just giving workers second chances. He knew where they was coming from. He's been in their shoes.
He taught these men and women new skills. He treated them with the utmost respect.
Now investigators are left asking, who would want to bludgeon this well-respected contractor and caring grandfather to death?
He really had no enemies. And just to see that the way that he died was so brutal, it was very difficult to know that someone would be capable of doing something like that.
As detectives finish up at the crime scene, they turn to Marty's son, who gives them a crucial lead.
When I showed up, I noticed that my dad's truck was gone. That really threw me off because he wouldn't even let me drive his truck. He wouldn't loan the truck out to no one.
It was a Chevy pickup that originally had belonged to Marty's father. That truck was everything to him.
Detectives put out a bolo, or be on the lookout for the missing truck.
We needed to find the truck and maybe hope that either the suspect was still driving it or that they left behind evidence that we could identify him.
We knew that this truck was a key to solving this homicide.
Investigators ask Marty's loved ones who they think would have seen him last.
We found out that Marty had been missing 2 or 3 days prior to the Friday the 15th that we found his body. And one of the things we were told by family and friends is that Marty goes to this Valero gas station every morning to get coffee.
The Valero had video that pointed down the street that the crime occurred on.
The manager said that Marty had arrived last at that store on Tuesday morning.
Detectives searched the security footage. On the day after Marty was last seen alive, and 3 days before his body was found, the truck appears.
Marty's truck was very unique, dark green color with custom wheels. This green truck was in a big hurry and it pulled out in front of a semi-truck and it was almost in an accident that we had captured on video.
Investigators need to track down Marty's truck and whoever is behind the wheel.
We thought if we find the truck, we're probably going to find our suspect. This is going to be our guy.
Coming up, detectives uncover suspects with dark pasts.
They said, he's violent. I thought, good Lord, if he gets violent, I don't know what I'm going to do.
She had frequented a lot of the local casinos.
She knew he had large sums of cash.
This was the break that we needed.
And the trail leads to an unlikely killer.
You're not going to think that this is someone who could kill somebody. That kind of broke open a whole new layer of the case.
The investigation took off at warp speed because we think we've got our guy.
Police investigating the murder of 63-year-old contractor Marty Lucas have obtained gas station surveillance video of someone driving his truck the day after he was last seen.
We collected hours and hours of video from the store. We were able to piece together some events that happened before and after the homicide.
The footage shows a busy street a few blocks from Marty's house. When detectives scour the rest of the security tapes, something grabs their attention.
On Wednesday morning, just after daylight, you can see a gentleman walking from the direction of Motel 6, and that person was walking towards Marty's home.
Is this unidentified man involved in Marty's murder?
You can see the suspect. Then an hour later, you can see on the video that there's one guy in the truck, that there's a single person in the truck.
And so we thought he might be the same person that was in that video. Marty did not allow just anyone to drive this truck. In fact, he did not allow anyone to drive this truck. We had to follow the stolen truck. That was really going to be our key to solving this case.
While officers continue their search for the truck, detectives return to speak to Marty's family and friends.
That's one of the things we were trying to just nail down is, who has Marty been hanging out with lately? Who has he been working with? Who has he had problems with, if anyone?
Police learn that along with helping people back up on their feet, Marty often forged friendships with those he employed.
Marty would become close with some of the men that he worked with or that he would hire and try to get to know them.
There's probably about 6 or 7 of them I actually got pretty close to. He built up friendships with them.
Amanda and Jason, Marty's neighbors, were very close to him. Amanda used to work for Marty because she paints very well.
He didn't look down on me for, I was trying to get my life back on track. And he told me he did it, so you can do it.
Marty would bring a lot of these folks to family dinners or get-togethers. He tried to bring them into his family.
But now, police want to know, had Marty's generosity and business exposed him to danger?
He paid all of his people in cash. And that's just the way it is in the day labors with those guys. They need money that day, so they're going to work. And everything's cash.
To know that he could pay them daily with cash and help them out may have led to his demise.
Police also discover not all Marty's employees felt like part of the family.
It wasn't an easy road for Marty because sometimes he would have to tell them that they couldn't work for him anymore because they would steal from him.
Anytime you're working with people who have drug and alcohol problems, it's not uncommon for them to steal from their employers. And Marty had faced some of that. He wasn't afraid to stand up to these people. He would tell them, if you mess up, you're gone.
So our list of suspects was a mile long. We were given several names, but yeah, it was so difficult for investigators because it was going to be hard to track them down. Where they were staying, they usually don't keep jobs very long.
As detectives begin tracking down Marty's current and former employees, they ask his neighbor if anyone had a grudge against him.
Well, I initially went to interview Amanda, and she said, over the last month or so, there's been some rough-looking characters over there.
1 month before his death, he had been hanging out with these new people, and they were helping him work on his truck and then had to redo the job.
She thought maybe there had been some anger issues between the victim and those guys.
The day they were there working, Marty seemed to be pacing back and forth like they were taking too long, and he didn't want to, leave them at his house. They were making too big of a mess. He was upset about that.
Amanda didn't know the men, but had overheard Marty talk to the man in charge.
One was a guy named Junior, and so this was someone that we wanted to speak with.
There's just one problem.
We did not know who Junior was.
We knew this to be probably a nickname, and that's all we really knew.
While detectives plan to search for Junior, Amanda also provides them with the name of another one of Marty's former employees.
Marty met Chris Dyer at Valero, the local convenience store that he went to nearly every morning to get a cup of coffee. Chris had recently been fired from that store, had a falling out with the owner, and Marty had employed him.
I know Chris Dyer had worked for Marty, had been fired from there for drug use.
He'd had a criminal past. He'd been arrested, had an addiction problem with drugs and alcohol.
Officers speak with the owner of the Valero station where Chris once worked.
The owner-manager of the Valero store reaffirmed that Chris was just not a very good guy, that he had had trouble employing him, and so he felt like that he needed to let Chris go because there was always drama, that Chris was basically just at rock bottom and desperate for money. Chris Dyer knew that Marty carried several $100s. When he paid him for a job, he would pay him at the end of the day, and he would pay him with cash.
Was Chris Dyer desperate enough to bludgeon Marty Lucas to death?
We were thinking that maybe it was a robbery gone bad, knowing that Marty had this money in his home because he was down on his luck and needed money for drugs. And so there was a lot of questions concerning Chris Dyer. One of our main priorities early on in the investigation is to find this subject named Junior, along with Chris Dyer. And so we wanted to talk to these people.
So we need to locate Junior, and we needed to talk to Chris as quickly as possible.
Police investigating the murder of contractor Marty Lucas are chasing multiple leads as they search for his killer and stolen truck. They've set their sights on two of Marty's employees, an unidentified man called Junior and a recently fired laborer named Chris Dyer.
A lot of these folks who are going through tough times, there is nothing permanent in their lives. There is nothing fixed in their lives. There is no stability. And so it was hard to track them down.
Following a lead, police questioned employees at the gas station where Chris had worked.
I spoke with the clerk that was on duty at the Valero, and she was able to give me a phone number to Gina Dyer. Gina is Chris's estranged wife.
She and Chris had been separated about a month because she had caught him cheating. He had gone back to drug use, and that he was currently living at the Econo Lodge Hotel.
Detectives find Chris at the hotel and bring him in for an interview.
We really thought that we had something. We knew that Chris had easy access to Marty's home. Chris Dyer knew that Marty carried up to $500 to $600 in cash on him at any given point in time.
So there's a rumor that some rumors went around that maybe you and him had gotten crossways and he had basically fired you. So you never had a disagreement.
No, not at all. Nope. I'd like to know who in the hell's saying that, because that's bullshit. Pardon my French.
Police know better than to trust Chris's word.
We knew that Chris Dyer is down on his luck and had run-ins with the law, and well, maybe this is our killer. This is who it is. And then you get him in an interview room, and he's cooperative, and he's genuine. In fact, he was very distraught over Marty's death.
I hope you catch who the hell did it and fry their ass.
Yeah, I know, right?
But he was, man, that guy would do anything for anybody. I had some empathy there because he'd been in trouble before, too. But, damn sure didn't deserve to go out like that.
I think he considered Marty a friend, even though Marty had fired him.
Would you be willing for us to go through your truck, look through your hotel room, to see if there's anything that would be...
Yeah, I got
that we can roll you out?
Marty had what we would consider defensive wounds to the hands. There was hair and blood under the fingernails of the body. And so we knew that there was some type of altercation. We knew that there had to be injuries on our suspect or suspects. And Chris had none of that. He had no recent cuts or bruises.
In order to officially rule Chris out as a suspect, detectives check Chris's alibi.
He said he had gone to Kingston, Oklahoma, which is nearby, with Krista, his girlfriend. I believe it was the Wednesday before.
Police bring Krista in for an interview.
Is it possible that he slipped out of the room one night while you were sleeping, left, went and did something?
No, I have to say that just could not be possible.
His girlfriend also corroborated Chris's timeline as to what his story was. He had an alibi for that timeline, but he just didn't appear to be involved.
With nothing to link Chris to the murder, police are forced to let him go. investigators hope Marty's preliminary autopsy report will provide more leads.
The significant thing for us from the autopsy was the fact the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, including the large gash to his head. Obviously, he was hit with something other than the rock because of the laceration on his head and because of the burn marks.
These burns that was on his back and part of his right arm came back as post-mortem burns, which was very interesting to us, which means that they were caused after Marty had passed away. Initially, we were looking at these burns to the body as being type of a torture. Now, we believe the iron was used as a secondary weapon after. So the suspect didn't realize that. In his rage, he didn't know that Marty had already died, and he continued to hit him with this iron.
The preliminary autopsy report doesn't conclude whether the rock or iron ultimately killed Marty, and an exact time of death remains undetermined. Meanwhile, with the killer still at large, the worry takes a toll on Marty's family.
His son, Michael's always a quiet person, but he was like a walking zombie.
I couldn't sleep at night. I'd stay up during the day. It's fear for my family. Just because, I had no clue who would do this to my dad.
Michael was really panicked. Marty had so many different men working with him. I was very fearful of my life.
As police continue their search for other suspects, including the former employee Junior who worked on Marty's truck, a lead comes in about someone close to Marty who might have had a motive.
One of Marty's friends had called one of our patrol officers and told him that Marty was dating a lady named Donna Hargrave.
So, Donna Hargrave is somebody that probably everybody at the Ardmore Police Department is familiar with and knows on site.
We knew Donna had a drug problem as well. She did have a few run-ins with police and frequented a lot of the local casinos.
Could Donna's vices have pushed her to murder Marty?
She knew Marty and knew that he had large sums of cash, and because she is a known drug user, that perhaps she had enlisted the assistance of another known drug user to go rob Marty. That was a scenario, obviously had some possibility to it. That's why we needed to talk to Donna as quickly as possible.
Officers bring Donna down to the police department for an interview.
Upon bringing her into the interview room, she was handcuffed, and I knew she had not come up there willingly.
What's this about? Yes, if I'm not under arrest, then why do y'all have a reason to search me?
She was really uncooperative. She did not want to speak to us.
Okay, what is this about? Please, get this over with and tell me what it's about.
Okay, so...
Somebody who I've been hanging with.
Yeah.
Okay, who?
Marty Lucas.
That Pepperwood. And that's straight up.
She definitely has a problem with Marty that was very suspicious, and it really struck a nerve in us because we wanted to know what this problem is.
Two days after finding the body of 63-year-old Marty Lucas, police are interviewing his former girlfriend, Donna Hargrave, a woman with a long criminal history and a grudge against Marty.
She had been arrested many times here in Ardmore. She had been known to be at least uncooperative with police, if not somewhat violent and unruly.
She didn't really care too much for Marty. We thought maybe she had something to do with his death.
He pissed me off because he was just being a dickhead.
So when you said f*** him, what were you mad at him about?
He just promised things and don't ever fall through. Like I talked to Marty about moving my trailer over to him. Over to his house or something. He said no.
He knew that she had not been clean and that she had not been trying to straighten up and that he wasn't going to help her as long as she wasn't trying to help herself.
Could Marty's rejection have led Donna to do something unthinkable?
So if I were to tell you something bad happened to Marty, what would you say?
What do you mean? What's wrong with him?
Well, if I were to tell you he was dead, someone did something to him, what would you say about that?
Are you serious?
Yeah.
What
This was a girl that was very hardened, and for her to break down and to cry and was very genuinely upset over Marty's death.
She did say that they had recently broken up and that she hadn't seen him anytime in the last 4, 5, 7 days.
Can you kind of start like maybe Wednesday morning, tell me where you were, what you did, where you went?
At my mom's, and I slept all day.
Okay.
And we were able to pretty quickly corroborate where she had been.
It was unlikely that she had anything to do with his death. However, we did not rule her out immediately.
Days after Marty's gruesome death, his family and friends come together to say their goodbyes.
Marty's funeral was amazing. It was very, very sad, though, because everyone who knew him knew that he didn't deserve anything ever bad to happen to him. Everyone loved Marty. Everyone.
There was quite a bit of his workers, even his past workers, that come to his funeral. It was a good day, but a bad day at the same time.
Meanwhile, police doggedly follow each and every lead.
We did have a large suspect pool because we didn't know who all might have been working for Marty. One of the things that we wanted to get identified was who Junior was that was working on the truck. So myself and another investigator said, we'll run by the halfway houses and see if we can get Junior identified. So we went over to the Broadway house, and the director there gave us the name of Clarence Bibb Jr. He said he thought Junior was from up by Oklahoma City, and he's got a pretty extensive record, including some assault. Well, we really believe that if Junior and Marty had gotten into an altercation over the payment of the truck motor, maybe he took the money, it got out of hand, he killed Marty, took Marty's money and the truck, and took it back to Oklahoma City to chop it up.
We found that law enforcement there knew Clarence very well. They knew his family very well. And they lived in several homes that would be described as a compound, like a family compound.
And they said, don't go out there without a lot of us. Clarence is violent, and so you don't go up there by yourself.
Detectives assemble a task force with local and state police and make the 2-hour drive to Junior's compound.
When I first got out there, I thought, man, this is a real possibility. Man, we might find our truck out here. So we went up and knocked on the door. And when Clarence showed up, I thought, good Lord, this is one large man. And if he gets violent, I don't know what I'm going to do. You look at him and you see what had happened to Marty, you're thinking that if anybody could do it, this guy could do it. He's big.
Detectives ask if he and Marty had fallen out over the work Junior had done on Marty's truck.
And he was happy with what Marty had paid him, and there was no disagreement.
He said that Marty paid him $500 more than he was supposed to because of the trouble that we went through.
And in fact, when I told him that Marty had died and that someone had caused his death, he too got emotional. Here, this big, mean, gruff country guy, and he's crying like a child over his friend's death.
He said, I wouldn't hurt Marty if somebody paid me to. He said he considered Marty a mentor and a friend.
Clarence denied that he had been in Ardmore recently. He gave an alibi that he had been at home with his mom and other family members around the time of Marty's death, and they corroborated his story that he was there. He fully cooperated with the investigation. He gave us his cell phone.
He let us have clothing and boots. He let us search his house. He let us search the property. And he let us just have free reign of whatever we wanted.
And we came up with nothing. I just remember thinking to myself, man, we are absolutely going nowhere with this investigation.
With nothing to link Junior to the homicide, detectives begin to fear the investigation is cooling down.
We had a pretty good idea that it wasn't Junior at that point. Donna Hargrave had a stone-clad alibi. Chris Dyer just didn't appear to be involved. I think both Bryce and I just were disheartened. We had no leads. We had no suspects, so we were just trying to figure out where do we go from here.
Then, an unexpected call turns the case red hot.
Well, we got back to the station, and dispatch yells down to us, "Hey, they found your truck." We were dead tired, but you went from dead tired to wide awake in a hurry.
Four days into the investigation of Marty Lucas's murder, detectives get the break they were looking for. Marty's missing truck.
And I remember the dispatcher telling me they found the truck. And I said, where is it? And they said in Springdale, Arkansas. And so this was the break that we needed.
We're pretty excited. We're just about to go nuts. We're like, okay, get a hold of Springdale police, get them on the phone, let's find out what we got going on. It was a moment, I'll say that.
Investigators asked Springdale police how Marty's truck had ended up over 300 miles away.
A citizen had called and told them that his friend had been in possession of the truck. And his friend, he identified as Jack Latham.
But who is Jack Latham? Detectives immediately ask Marty's family if they know the name. They learned Jack was one of Marty's most trusted laborers who hadn't been seen or heard from in months.
Jack Latham, he worked for my dad for a long time. He was a really hard worker.
Marty was extremely good to Jack. He gave him extra money here and there whenever he'd need it. Marty would bring him by my house sometimes, and they would occasionally ride around together. He seemed very quiet.
It was not unusual for people to come and go in Marty's business. Jack Latham worked for him on and off a couple of years prior to this.
When detectives dig into Jack's background, they learn he has a daughter and ex-wife in Ardmore and a checkered past.
He had an extensive criminal history for drugs and theft, but he's not the guy I would have picked to have committed this crime.
Jack Latham did minor misdemeanor type crimes, drug possession type crimes, but this is not a person that would even be on the radar because he had no really violent history.
So you're not going to think that this is a guy who could kill somebody, particularly not in the manner in which Marty was killed.
Investigators rush to Arkansas, where police have taken Jack into custody and seized the truck. But before speaking with Jack, they interview the man who first contacted police about the truck, Jack's friend, Raymond.
Raymond, he says to us that out of the blue, Jack calls on Friday night and says that he has got court on Monday, can he stay, or the weekend?
Raymond tells police Jack asked to get picked up at a local parking lot.
So he goes to pick him up, and he sees he's sitting in looks like a pretty nice Chevy pickup. And he says, hey, whose pickup is that? He said, oh, it's a guy that I'm visiting. He let me come sit in it to wait on you. And he says to us, I didn't believe him. Monday morning, Jack says, just take me to jail. I've got warrants. So he takes him to jail, and then he goes back home and he looks to see what the warrants are for, and it's for theft. And he thinks, I wonder if that truck's stolen, because something doesn't feel right with that truck. So he goes back to where the parking lot where the truck is and sees it doesn't have tags on it.
And so Raymond knew that Jack was lying. He knew he needed to call the police.
We went and looked at the truck, and the truck looked pristine on the inside. But when we sprayed it with Blue Star, there was blood everywhere.
We knew in the back of our minds that this was the key, that Jack Latham was the key to Marty Lucas's death.
And then the investigation took off at warp speed because, yeah, we think we've got our guy.
We went to the Benton County Jail and interviewed Jack that day.
First thing I noticed about him is he's slight of build. He's not very big. He seems to be very reserved and meek. He doesn't seem to be what I would picture to be a killer.
Then police noticed something else about Jack's appearance.
He looked pretty bad. He had some injuries to his face. He had this greenish brown black eye or injury to his eye. He had a minor abrasion to his lip.
Could Jack have suffered his injuries while attacking his former boss, Marty? Police start by asking Jack when he was in Ardmore last.
Okay. I guess at some point in time you've been in Ardmore, been around Ardmore, or lived in Ardmore or something. Yeah, a long time ago, about 6 years ago.
Jack tells detectives he's recently been living 200 miles away in Enid, Oklahoma.
Who were you staying with? My brother and him.
Then, investigators cut to the chase.
We've been working on an investigation for the last almost a week now. Your name's come up. And before I can really get into a lot of questions with you and details and explain to you, why we're here and all that, I got to read you your Miranda rights.
After we Mirandized him, he said he didn't want to talk to us anymore.
Do you wish to make a statement, or will you answer any questions that we have for you today? No. No? Okay.
With Jack refusing to talk, police need to find a way to place him near Marty's house at the time of the murder.
So, in his initial interview, he tells us that he hasn't been to Ardmore, that he came down here from his brother's house in Enid. I called Enid PD, and they went out, they talked with the brother, they talked with the brother's wife. They said, yes, he has been here at our house.
But then, detectives get a stunning piece of information Jack hadn't shared.
His brother's wife said I'd put him on the bus to go see his wife and daughter in Ardmore on the Monday morning before Marty had been killed. So we knew he had gotten to Ardmore. The next day, we got a hold of the bus and found out that, yes, indeed, he had been at Ardmore.
With Jack still in custody, police drive back to Ardmore.
The detectives got a search warrant and looked through Jack's phone, and that led them to his ex-wife and daughter.
Did you see your dad in the truck last week?
No.
Okay. Do you understand what kind of trouble your dad's possibly in? He's been detained as a suspect in a homicide. So you for sure haven't seen your dad since he's been in Ardmore?
Investigators talk to Jack's ex-wife, Teresa, next.
Has he came to visit you lately? No?
But I haven't seen from him or heard from him.
So would it surprise you to know that Jack is involved in a homicide here in Ardmore?
Yeah, because it doesn't seem like him.
Both of them said they haven't seen Jack. He hadn't been in Ardmore. They don't know what we're talking about.
And we knew this was not true because on Jack's phone, we knew that he had called Teresa and Shelby.
And during that interview with Teresa, I laid it out for her. I just flat out told her I knew she was lying.
I'm not saying anything. I've told you guys everything I know.
No, you haven't.
Yes, sir, I have.
No, you haven't. And we can prove it. It's a matter of time before we put you in that truck. We put you in that truck, it starts getting serious in a real quick hurry.
Police start to question if Jack's ex-wife and daughter are involved in Marty's murder.
At that point, she decided that she didn't want to talk to us anymore, and she and Shelby left, and I just told her we're not going to stop. We're going to solve this crime with or without you. The only question is, what's your role going to be?
Less than 24 hours later, police get a call.
The next day, early morning, Teresa called, said, I want to come back and talk. So from that, that kind of broke open a whole new layer of the case.
Police investigating the murder of Marty Lucas are trying to place his friend and employee, Jack Latham, at the scene of the crime.
We knew that he was coming here to visit his wife and daughter.
They both told investigators that they did not know where Jack was. They had not seen Jack. He had not been in Ardmore.
But Jack's daughter and ex-wife returned to the police station the next day.
Yesterday, you were pretty firm that you didn't know nothing.
I was really scared and I thought about it all night and I felt really bad. Really hit home, so I had to tell the truth. I did see Jack on the 11th and 12th.
Which was what, Monday and Tuesday?
Monday and Tuesday.
Okay.
And he dropped us off at my mom's house on the 13th in the morning.
Teresa says Jack stayed at an Ardmore motel on Monday and Tuesday nights.
They said Jack had called Marty to see if he had any work for him. And Marty said, no, I can't use you. I don't need you right now.
And do you know what day that was?
Tuesday night.
They both said that about 8 or 8:30 on that Wednesday morning, Jack left, sent an officer to Motel 6 to see if they had video. And sure enough, we've got video of Jack Latham leaving Motel 6, wearing the same clothes as the person that's walking. The Bolero camera picks up.
About an hour later, a green Chevrolet truck that we believe was Marty's truck shows up in the parking lot at Motel 6.
You watch him go over to a dumpster, throw something in the dumpster, which we believe was the rock and the iron. Where did he go get the truck?
He said his friend gave it to him.
Then, Jack did something even more suspicious.
When he came in, he went straight to the sink and washed his hands. He did wipe his face down, and he put his hoodie on, and he told me that he did something bad, but he wouldn't tell me what.
He said, we gotta leave, we gotta get out of here. He drops them off, and they don't see him again.
And so by then, we got enough to file charges on Jack Latham.
I called the family members and told them what we knew.
I was very shocked because Jack had been in my house around my children. He just acted very shy, but he didn't act like he would hurt anyone.
It was shocking to me because he treated Jack with respect like he did everyone else.
Police charge Jack Latham with first-degree murder and extradite him from Arkansas. When he arrives in Ardmore, Jack starts talking.
Jack told me that he was in desperate need of money. He had no job. He needed money for drugs. And he knew that Marty Lucas was the source of that money. Marty had told him no, that he knew that he wasn't clean. His story was that a physical altercation occurred, that he took a rock paperweight from the kitchen table, struck Marty with it, that, in his words, he freaked out, took the keys to the truck and a few $100s from the wallet and left the area.
Jack denies attacking Marty with a stone from outside or the iron.
There were some aspects where he seemed to truly be confused about what had happened because he was strung out on drugs, including, was there an iron used?
So what had really happened? Police have their own theory as to how the murder played out.
We believe that this was premeditated.
I think he went to Marty's house, and I think he picked that rock up on the outside of the house and he knocked on the door. Because I don't think he was going to take no for an answer. And when Marty told him no, a fight ensued in which he struck Marty with the rock. I think Marty fought back. He struck him with the iron, which was readily available, and then burned him with it, whether on purpose or on accident. He took the iron and he took the rock with him, and he disposed of the evidence, and he drove to Arkansas.
It was absolutely senseless over a few $100s.
Despite the evidence, prosecutors worry defense lawyers will try to argue Jack was desperate and never planned to kill Marty.
I thought that this case met the elements from a legal standpoint of first-degree murder, but then you have to be mindful of the fact that a jury would think also Jack's explanation is somewhat believable. He's a hopeless junkie. He's desperate for money.
With the family's consent, prosecutors charged Jack with second-degree murder.
We didn't want to risk going to trial and then letting him free.
In October 2020, Jack Latham pleads guilty and is sentenced to 25 years in prison.
I feel like we got justice. I know he's going to be locked up and my family's going to be safe.
Jack was very unexpected as a killer because he just didn't act like he was that type of person.
Jack Latham, he's still a mystery to me, because just by being around him, I never thought he would do something like that.
He did this for nothing. There was no reason for nothing.
Marty was such a nice guy. But not only that, think of all the people whose lives he affected in a positive way. That's a sense of loss for our community.
When I lost Marty, I lost my life too. He was the most amazing person I could ever. Sorry.
Despite Marty's horrific death, the legacy of his compassion lives on.
My dad, he'd be very proud of the lives that he's changed in the community.
It made me appreciate everything about Marty and the second chances he gave to everybody, because it made me feel like I should give people second chances.
A devoted couple building the perfect family.
They were both very committed to adopting children that had a difficult past.
Everybody in the family loved her.
Murdered in a night of unspeakable horror.
She saw a man with what appeared to be an axe.
Her skull was split with a maul.
Who could have wanted Bob and Kay Swartz dead?
This person had threatened to kill them.
We couldn't rule out anyone. We just didn't know.
And what detectives uncovered has everyone blindsided.
I didn't have a single suspicion. I would have never thought.
The relatives were in disbelief.
The expected killer hadn't done it. The unexpected killer had done it.
Nobody in a million years would have expected them to commit one of the most heinous crimes in the history of Annapolis.
On a cold winter morning in 1984,
Armando County Police.
Police in Cape St. Clair, Maryland, receive an eerie call.
Okay, what is the problem, sir? My parents are dead. You think your parents are dead?
Yeah. first responders race to the scene and make a horrific discovery.
When I arrived, there were uniformed officers that were protecting the crime scene who told me we had a 17-year-old and a 9-year-old who just learned that their parents, Bob and Kay Schwartz, were killed.
The children are visibly shaken and in shock, but agree to answer a few questions.
My partner and I met with a young man by the name of Larry Schwartz and his sister Annie. Both of them were very calm. This young man, he said that he had gotten up that morning and that Annie, who was 9, told them that she didn't know where their parents were. He then looked out the dining room window and saw his mother's body in the backyard. He told me he immediately shielded Annie's eyes so Annie wouldn't see her body and called the police.
Detective Barr leaves the kids in the care of the attending officers and moves to the backyard. It's his first grim look at the scene of the crime.
Kay Schwartz was found outside. She was a few feet from the sliding glass door in the snow. She only had one sock on her right foot. Her left foot was bare.
The blood in the snow was horrific. It was just horrific.
The blood had created a slush in the snow. Kay Schwartz had puncture wounds around her neck, and she had a massive wound to the top of her skull.
Detective Barr then heads inside.
I looked in the basement area, and I found a black vinyl chair that had pooled blood beside it. It appeared as though she had been attacked sitting in that chair, and she bled heavily onto the floor. And there was blood from that chair leading out back.
Just when it seems the crime scene can't get any more grisly, detectives discover another ravaged body.
We found a small office adjacent to the landing of the stairs. The door was closed. We opened the door, looked inside, and found Bob Schwartz's body. There was an inordinate number of stab wounds to Bob Schwartz. There were defensive wounds in the body. We theorized at that point it was very possible that Kay was attacked first, and then Bob heard the noise and started to come out of the room, giving Kay the opportunity to flee out the back door as the killer or killers went after Bob.
As detectives make their way through the rest of the house, they see no signs of forced entry. Did Bob and Kay know their attacker? Or did an intruder sneak in through an unlocked door?
As I viewed this crime scene, the enormity was off the chart. There was blood found everywhere. It was extraordinarily gruesome.
Investigators collect blood evidence, but there's no sign of a knife or any kind of murder weapon. Then, toward the back of the house, they spot a critical clue.
We found a bloody palm print on the sliding glass door near Kay's body. We wanted to figure out who it actually belonged to. Bob obviously never left the computer room. He died where he was attacked. And Kay's body was outside, and neither one of her hands had blood on the palms. That palm print probably belonged to the killer.
While concerned neighbors whisk Larry and Annie away, detectives get a chance to talk to some of Bob and Kay's grieving friends who have gathered at the house.
When I found out that Bob and Kay had been murdered, I said, "What? You're numb. You don't know what happened." And I just couldn't believe that Bob and Kay were gone.
Bob and Kay Schwartz met at the University of Maryland outside Washington, D.C. They were both getting their master's degree in education. They both wanted to be teachers. He was 35, she was 27. She fell in love with him, and maybe 18 months later they married.
They were very involved in all kinds of church activities. Kay and Bob were intimately involved. Everybody seemed to know them. Everybody felt a connection with them.
Bob was an engineer of sorts, worked at NASA Goddard down in Greenbelt, Maryland, in the space program on some level.
Bob had to be a pretty clever man because he was involved in computers back in the dark ages, 1984.
He was always very positive. He was funny, quick sense of humor.
Kay was the fun-loving, carefree spirit, beloved by everyone who knew her. Always wanted to be a teacher, became a teacher. They wanted children, but Kay was unable to have children.
Far from breaking their spirit, Bob and Kay's disappointment only seemed to strengthen their bond and gave them a loving sense of purpose.
They decided they wanted to open their house and their hearts.
In 1973, Bob and Kay embarked on their dream.
That became part of their mission in life, in adopting children that had a difficult past, to provide some substance and some guidance.
Larry Swartz was 6 years old when the Swartzes adopted him. 6 years later, they adopted a 4-year-old girl, Anne.
Annie was born in Korea, did not speak much English when she first arrived. Annie and Larry were happy to be part of that family.
Kay and Bob wanted to be the best parents ever to those children.
Now, Larry and Annie were orphans again, and detectives need to find out who committed such a heinous crime and why. Police begin by talking to neighbors, hoping to find a witness who might lead them to the killer.
We were alerted by a person approximately a block away on a parallel street that he had found what appeared to be a blood trail leading into the woods at the end of that street. And as we followed that trail, we found what appeared to be a barefoot footprint and a socked footprint.
Were these Kay's footprints? If so, how did they end up in the woods when her body was found in the backyard?
We also found a pair of footprints made by shoes. Footprints suggesting a chase through the neighborhood.
The trail of footprints ran for quite a distance through the woods and the neighborhood.
The footprints seemed to suggest that after stabbing Bob to death, the murderer went after Kay one last time.
In my opinion, it appeared as though Kay Schwartz was fleeing from her killer, and at some point, a person caught up with her and then walked her to the back of the home where she was killed.
At the end of the trail, detectives make one more pivotal discovery.
Searching through the woods, my sergeant found what appeared to be a murder weapon. It was a wood-splitting maul. There appeared to be blood on the maul, along with hair. But the handle appeared to have been wiped clean. There wasn't any blood on the handle at all.
Detectives send the maul to the lab, but find no trace of a knife anywhere. It's a puzzling scene that offers them few clues.
It was a very difficult crime scene to try to put together in your mind what may have happened or how did this occur. At this point, we only had 2 children, Larry and Annie, who could provide any information.
When detectives circle back to them at the neighbor's house, they do their best to help.
Annie related to us that she had awakened in the middle of the night to her father's screams of "Help me, help me." She continued to tell us that she went to investigate and she walked to the door that exited to the carport. At that point, she saw a man walking away with what appeared to be an axe over his shoulder. And she described the person as very tall, with curly hair, and asked, "Was that person as tall as me?" She said, "No, he was taller."
Detectives speak to Larry next, but suddenly the 17-year-old seems nervous. Does he know something about the man Annie saw in the yard?
When we pressed Larry, he said that Michael was 6'4".
Detectives stop cold. Who is Michael?
And very quickly I established that Michael Schwartz was a brother of Larry.
As it turned out, Bob and Kay Schwartz had adopted 3 children.
Michael, who was also 17, no longer lived with them, but it wasn't clear why. So at that point, we were very, very eager to talk to Michael.
Coming up, investigators uncover bad blood and dark secrets.
They send him to a state mental hospital.
Detectives uncover startling clues.
Nobody expected anything like this to happen.
It became almost unbelievable.
Was there more than one person with a score to settle?
This person said, I could stick a knife in his back.
We didn't know what we were dealing with.
When they appear to have no suspects in the homicides of Bob and Kay Swartz, police learn the couple's adopted children have an estranged brother.
Both Annie and Larry related to us that Michael no longer lived with them, but had been getting into a lot of trouble.
Detectives are anxious to know more. Could Michael have possibly wanted to harm Bob and Kay?
As we spoke to relatives during the investigation, Michael was quickly identified by them as someone we should look at very closely.
Michael had made threats internally in the house.
Detectives interview the Swartz's friends and family to get more insight into Michael's history. Larry was the Swartz's first adopted child. But long before Annie, Bob and Kay provided Larry with a brother.
Michael was 8 years old when the Swartzes adopted him. The boys were only 6 months apart in age.
The Swartz's second adopted child had arrived at their home, a troubled boy.
As they interviewed everybody, detectives found that Michael's mother abandoned him when he was an infant, and Michael was relinquished to the custody of the state and became a foster child. He went through a series of 6 foster homes before the Swartzes adopted him.
Bob and Kay were determined to turn Michael's life around, but the boy's difficult past wasn't easy to shake, and the problem started almost immediately.
Michael was so antisocial in his approach to life. Michael was having behavioral issues at home, not obeying his parents on a consistent basis, smarting back, profanity.
As the boys grew older, Michael continued to struggle. But that didn't stop Bob and Kay from having high hopes for both their children.
I think Bob and Kay expected Larry and Michael to apply themselves very diligently to their studies and to do well. I think that Larry had a desire to please people. He had kind of a soft-spoken shyness to him. He seemed to want to engage with people. But I think Michael was a challenge from the get-go. I think Michael, he had some deviancies that probably would have precluded anybody from having any type of relationship with him on any level.
2 years after Michael was adopted, Bob and Kay found a new ray of hope when they adopted Annie.
Annie was cute as a button when she arrived. Everybody loved her.
Bob adored Anne. Annie became the apple of her father's eye, and suddenly Annie, the baby, became the favorite child. Everybody in the family loved her.
The more attention Bob gave Annie, the harder he was on his 2 boys. Larry seemed to be able to turn the other cheek, but not Michael.
Michael had been getting into trouble more increasingly over the last year or so.
Michael began to have problems of a fairly serious nature. Tension between he and his father, tension between he and the other family members.
By 1980, Michael's rebellious nature pushed his parents to their breaking point.
One night, Michael asked to go out, and they said no. So he sneaked out. Went out with his buddies. When he came back home at about midnight, he pounds on the door. His mother comes to the door, looks at him and says, "No, we're not letting you in." He goes over to a neighbor's house, spends the night, goes to school the next day on his own. And while he's there, his parents had called. Social services said, "We can't handle him anymore."
After 5 years of struggling with Michael, Bob and Kay were so concerned about his volatile behavior that they asked the state to place him with another family.
He never lived at home again.
It was just a very difficult situation. Bob and Kay loved him, but they felt there was nothing they could do for him.
While Bob and Kay tried to stay focused on Larry and Annie, Michael's state of mind seemed to deteriorate.
Michael had been in a reform school and he got in a fight and got in some trouble, so they sent him to a state mental hospital for evaluation. And that was just a few weeks before the murders. He was staying at this facility.
The Crownsville State Hospital Center was terrifying, faceless, institutional, decrepit buildings, straight out of a Stephen King nightmare.
Had Bob and Kay's rejection led Michael Swartz to commit a cold-blooded murder? Detective Barr and his partner decide to make the short drive to Crownsville and ask Michael for themselves.
He was interrogated by these talented homicide detectives. Michael's denying.
Michael's words say one thing, but to the detectives, his appearance tells a different story.
They did notice it. Michael had very noticeable marks on his long neck, and he clearly had an injury of some kind there. But he said they were hickeys.
Detectives keep pushing, but Michael is adamant that he was at the hospital on the night of the murders, and the hospital records back up his claims.
We learned from the staff that their logs indicated that Michael had been there all evening.
He has what appears to be an ironclad alibi. I mean, he is in a locked ward in a state mental hospital.
The police weren't so sure. A lot of people weren't so sure. It was very lax at this Crownsville State facility. It's not a prison. It's just a hospital.
Detectives aren't completely convinced of Michael's alibi, but they don't have enough to arrest him either. And soon after that interview, Michael Swartz lawyers up.
Of course, I finally got to him. I did what all defense lawyers do, which is to say, don't say a word to anybody about anything. He was never interrogated again.
Michael won't talk, and the lab has found no useful prints on the handle of the splitting maul. But detectives know one key piece of evidence from the crime scene that could tell them everything they need to know.
During the investigation, there was a bloody palm print recovered from the sliding glass door. We had examined both victims. Neither one had blood on the palms.
If detectives can prove Michael Swartz left that print, they'll have their murderer. But that's easier said than done.
This evidence was difficult to analyze. We were very limited in 1984 with what we could do. This would involve the evidence being sent to the FBI laboratory in Washington.
Detectives investigating the savage double murder of Bob and Kay Swartz are hoping one of their most promising pieces of evidence will help them catch the killer.
A bloody palm print was lifted and sent to the FBI laboratory for analysis. We knew that it would probably take a long time to get those results.
While the feds in Washington do their careful work, the shocking news of the murder spreads.
There was a tremendous uproar in the community about this murder. A couple were murdered in their own home. A crazed killer chasing a woman through the neighborhood. There was a lot of pressure to solve the case.
That pressure only mounts when detectives receive the coroner's report. It's a grim account of a seemingly psychotic attack.
The wounds to Mr. Swartz numbered 17 in total, and in fact were lethal. Both his right and left carotid were severed during the attack.
On Kay Swartz, the autopsy showed that she was stabbed 7 times around her neck area, but they were very light wounds, tentative, and then her skull was split with a maul.
Detectives still haven't been able to locate the knife used in the attack, but the coroner's report does appear to confirm that they're on the right track.
According to the medical examiner, we had the right theory about how this may have occurred. Kay was stabbed in the basement, got up to flee. The killer would have chased Kay Schwartz as she ran from the neighborhood and into the woods, then back to the house where she was killed.
Is it possible Michael Schwartz eluded security at the Crownsville Mental Hospital and committed this crime? If so, detectives need to understand why.
I think it's fair to say there was tension in the house. Bob had a bit of a shorter fuse than Kay and had a little bit less willingness to be tolerant of some of the children's shortcomings.
Neighbors tell detectives a story they remember from a few years before, when Michael was still living with the Schwartzes.
Michael got in trouble for some sin, fighting on a school bus, something like that. And his father decided physical labor was what he needed. So he gave him this heavy wood splitting maul and said, take this stump out of the front yard, the dead tree stump. It was massive, a massive thing. There was no way Michael could get it. But he just swung it again and again and again.
Neighbors told us that Michael chopped at that tree every evening for up to 3 hours. And approaching a month later, the stump was still there. This boy had blisters on his hands.
Michael was seething and getting more and more angry. Everybody said Michael had threatened to kill his parents.
Could the maul that was used to teach Michael Schwartz a lesson have been the same one that ended Kay's life?
Michael told his mother, Kay, that I could walk up to Bob and stick a knife in his back, kill him, and no results would befall me because I'm a juvenile. The logical assumption on all of our parts was Michael had made good on his threat. He had said he would do it, and now he's done it.
4 days after they were found brutally murdered, Bob and Kay are laid to rest.
The funeral, I had replays of having moments with them. I always admired them. Like, why would somebody kill them?
The couple's obedient children, Larry and Annie Schwartz, have been staying with friends of the family, while their brother still resides at Crownsville.
Michael Schwartz was allowed out of the hospital to come to the funeral, and at the cemetery, both boys stood over the grave and shook holy water, one into Kay's grave, the other into Bob's grave. Off to one side, the two detectives on the case stood in their suits with their sunglasses in the cemetery.
Everyone gathered around, gave them their support. But most people believed it was Michael who had done it.
Many note the suspicious red marks still visible on Michael's neck. Talk spreads through the community.
The newspapers were saying that Michael was a suspect. But even though he was in Crownsville at the time, there was some question about the accountability there, and maybe he could have gotten away and done it.
With lingering concerns over Michael's alibi and the security at Crownsville, detectives decide there's only one way to find the truth, once and for all.
Wanting to make sure that we had crossed every T and dotted every I, my partner and I decided that we were going to follow up and visit that mental hospital again. We wanted to make sure that it was impossible that Michael would never have been able to leave undetected. So we asked the staff to lock us in the ward where Michael was committed. If Michael could have gotten out of that, there was a chance Michael had done it.
Detectives are about to put Michael Schwartz's alibi to the test by locking themselves in the room where he stayed at the Crownsville Mental Hospital.
If he had killed his parents, Michael would have had to leave undetected, return, and get back in without someone discovering that. And we went through every door and every window, and there was no possible way we could have gotten out of that without help. So it was very convincing to us that Michael was not at the scene of the murder. Michael's been eliminated as a suspect.
It's good news for Michael, but a setback for detectives. The young man was their strongest lead. Undaunted, investigators reach out to the public, hoping to cast a much wider net.
As we conducted our investigation, we methodically went through a list of possible persons that may have intended harm to the Schwartzes. We started a hotline for people to call in tips, and we got phone calls from various neighbors and acquaintances.
One of the many calls that come in immediately piques the detectives' interest.
Persons we interviewed told us that Bob steadfastly picketed an abortion clinic in Annapolis for 4 years. Never missed a Saturday. And he would approach women entering the abortion clinic and attempt to change their mind about what they were going to do.
He would intensely try to dissuade women from coming into the clinic. He would get up in their faces.
Detectives confirm that a few of those women filed police reports against Bob, so they begin interviewing every complainant and witness connected with those reports.
The police were called on several occasions by the clinic. Bob was never arrested, but he caused the abortion clinic a lot of grief.
Could the killer be someone Bob confronted, or someone with a grudge against Kay?
Kay was a school teacher at Broadneck High School.
In her classroom, she was known for laissez-faire, not a strict disciplinarian.
According to witnesses, Kay was well liked in school. She was an easygoing teacher.
Detectives pursue every credible tip that comes in.
Our investigation revealed that there was no evidence that anyone would have a vendetta against her. In fact, there was no motive that we could establish where anyone would have been that angry or vengeful to want to kill either of them.
"8 days after the brutal double murder, investigators have hit a wall. With no fingerprints on the splitting mall and their single most promising piece of evidence still under analysis, detectives are all out of options. Undaunted, they decide to start fresh, poring over every piece of evidence they do have, starting at the very beginning.
Anne Arundel County Police.
Someone said something come to my house.
Okay, what is the problem, sir?
My parents are dead.
You think your parents are dead?
Yes.
This time, investigators hone in on something they didn't notice before.
When I listened to the 911 call, Larry Schwartz said, "My parents are dead."
My parents are dead.
However, he told the first police officer on the scene that he hadn't gone downstairs. His father was in the basement. At that point, he was only known that his mother was dead, not his father. So there's an inconsistency there. It didn't make sense.
The discovery leads Detective Barr to take a harder look at Larry's version of events, and he finds several contradictions.
For example, Larry telling us that he saw his mother's body from the window. Yet I looked out the dining room window and couldn't see her body. I thought perhaps he was confused and meant to say the kitchen window, which turned out to be even worse. I climbed on the kitchen counter and looked out the window and still couldn't see her body.
Detective Barr had chalked it up to the extreme shock the boy had suffered that morning.
Larry's demeanor wasn't unusual at the time. Various people react differently under stress. He could have very well been in shock, repressing his feelings. I didn't know.
Barr wants to give Larry a chance to clear up his story, but that isn't going to happen.
Larry had gotten an attorney. The attorney had advised him not to talk to us.
At last, word comes in from the FBI. Test results on their key piece of evidence from the crime scene. The bloody palm print on the sliding glass door. The one detectives believed was made by the killer.
It came back. Finally, we could find out who it could possibly belong to, what we were dealing with.
Coming up, it's a twist that no one saw coming.
A chill just went up my spine. It just didn't seem right.
Detectives working to catch Bob and Kay Schwartz's killer finally had the results of their key piece of crime scene evidence from the FBI's forensic lab in Washington, D.C.
I was notified by the FBI laboratory that they had positively identified the bloody palm print recovered from the sliding glass door.
The results confirm what detectives believed months earlier. The palm print belongs to one of Bob and Kay's own children, but not the child they suspected.
It came back belonging to Larry Schwartz. At that point, the state's attorney for Anne Arundel County authorized an arrest warrant be obtained for Larry Schwartz.
Authorities charged young Schwartz as an adult with 2 counts of first-degree murder.
When the news gets out, it causes an uproar in Cape St. Clair. Michael Schwartz was known as the bad kid in the family, not handsome, likable Larry.
A chill just went up my spine. It just didn't seem right. I didn't have a single suspicion.
It was very difficult to accept that Larry had that type of violence within him.
Larry was seen as this model, mild-mannered son. Nobody in a million years would have expected him to commit one of the most heinous crimes in the history of Annapolis.
The community was in denial. The majority of them were convinced that Michael Schwartz had done this. There was certainly a lot of speculation about whether we had the right person or not.
It was very hard for people to believe that he could have done it. I think that they just felt there was more to this. There was more going on than any of us could understand.
Why would a docile youth, beloved by everybody, explode in a rage and stab both his parents? Why? Everybody wanted to know the answer.
Authorities want answers too. But Larry, at the direction of the defense team hired by concerned family friends, is not talking and has neither admitted nor denied guilt. So for the next 15 months, while Larry waits it out in jail, detectives spend every waking moment trying to build an airtight case.
We lacked a confession. The state's attorney for Anne Arundel County had me reassigned to his office to work exclusively on this case. We had to make sure that we had every piece of evidence we could get to close this case.
Without Larry's confession, detectives need to find out what led this soft-spoken boy to such violent extremes.
I continued to interview people, collect statements.
Investigators soon realized that Michael wasn't the only son who had a hard time at home.
I believe that Larry was under tremendous pressure. He was repeatedly chastised for the poor grades. He was restricted from leaving the yard.
I think it was more of a protection thing. You're trying to keep him away from the wrong crowd. And I think Larry could have been pulled in many ways. I think they were afraid of that.
I believe personally that he was angry. He was frustrated. It was cumulative, that he was holding rage inside him. And whatever may have happened that night set him off.
But some speculated that there was another reason why Larry turned on his parents.
Michael kept contact with Larry. He changed Larry's view of the family, and in a negative way. He was telling him that they just got rid of me, they want nothing to do with me, you know. Larry, he didn't want to be left like that. He didn't want to go into foster home again.
Larry was extremely worried that what happened to Michael would happen to him.
then it changed where he was afraid he was going to be put out.
Despite what may have led to this violent act, 17-year-old Larry Swartz is about to be tried for first-degree murder.
15 months after the crimes, the prosecutor had witnesses ready to lined up, psychiatric witnesses who said Larry was sane and he knew what he was doing and he actually planned it. And they had a case to present that showed premeditated, cold-blooded murder.
Larry Swartz looked unconcerned as he arrived this morning from the county jail where he had spent the last 15 months.
More than 60 witnesses have been subpoenaed to testify at Larry Swartz's trial, which is expected to last 2 weeks.
I was at the courthouse expecting a trial. There was no trial. Nobody expected anything like this to happen. It was shocking.
After detectives and prosecutors have labored more than a year preparing their case against Larry Swartz for the murder of his parents, a last-minute maneuver by Swartz's legal team has brought everything to an unexpected screeching halt. The trial is called off.
Larry had confessed to his attorneys.
He broke down. He broke down sobbing and heaving, and he said he did it, he was guilty, and he just killed them.
Finally, authorities have their confession, leaving behind any doubt of Larry's guilt.
Ultimately, the expected killer had done it. The unexpected killer had done it.
Now, the state's attorney's office has to decide what punishment could possibly fit this crime.
The state agreed to a plea of second-degree murder.
The prosecutor recommended a 20-year sentence with all but 12 suspended. The judge agreed to make it concurrent as opposed to consecutive. I've never seen a case that lenient.
The state's attorney wanted me to take Larry to the confinement facility. He knew that if I took Larry, there was a potential for Larry to tell me why he did this and how did it really occur. And I sat down with him and asked him to tell us, Larry, why did you do it? He didn't answer me. And I pressed him again, and he said, I just lost it. He said that he had come home from school that day, and later in the evening, his mother had asked him how he had done on his tests. And he knew that he had failed Spanish, and she had been writing him about not doing well in school. And she made a caustic remark about his grades, having you probably failed them, meaning the tests. So he took a knife and he stabbed her repeatedly about the neck. And then Bob was alerted to the activity, the noise, and he attacked Bob. Larry never did explain or admit to chasing Kay through the neighborhood. I found out during the autopsy that she'd been stabbed through her esophagus, so perhaps she couldn't scream. With sheer terror, running for her life, Larry did admit to putting the splitting maul into his mother's head.
After committing such a violent act, Larry knew there was only one way to cast off suspicion.
Armando County Police.
It came the realization that throughout the interview with Larry, he was trying to steer our investigation. He force-fed us information about Michael.
The whole time that his brother Michael was a suspect in the killings, Larry played the victim card.
When we were here for the funeral. Larry wanted to hang out with us, essentially, which we were perfectly prepared to do, not believing for a minute that he was involved. We viewed him as a victim, a kid who didn't have any parents at this point in time. It's, to this day, hard to fathom.
Though Larry's adoptive brother Michael had been exonerated, he nonetheless met with a tragic end.
When it turned out that he didn't commit the murders, he had nowhere to go. His parents are dead. His brother's in prison. His sister's been adopted by another family, and he has no one in the world. He starts doing drugs. And while he's taking drugs, he and his buddies go rob a man, and in the course of robbing the man, they stabbed him to death. Michael is sentenced to prison for life. None of the leniency his brother got. Life. He's now in his 50s, still in prison in the state of Maryland, 35 years later.
This just had to be one of the worst lose-lose destructive situations that society can see happen.
Looking back over this case, I have empathy for both Michael and Larry. I know that they struggled, yet the parents still tried to do the right thing.
Kay and Bob had adopted children who had been through a lot of bad times. And so I think they were trying to heal the wounds that they came to the family with.
For both Michael and Larry, I could understand the frustration, the anger, but I couldn't understand the murder. That's the part I didn't understand.
For more information on an unexpected killer, go to oxygen.com. A vibrant, outgoing woman starting the next chapter in her life.
She's just retired, and she was very much focused on the future. Diane was a person that everyone should meet in life. Positive, happy.
But her life is cut short in a night of immeasurable horror.
There was blood splatter everywhere.
I never saw so much trauma to one person's body.
It chills me to the bone.
Police have a complex scene and a long list of suspects.
There was over 100 male contacts in Diane's phone.
There was always drama with boyfriends.
He refused to give DNA. There was something out there that he was hiding. Every direction we followed, we ended up running into dead ends.
Just when police think they might never catch the killer.
Who could it be? Why is this so complicated?
The case takes a mind-blowing turn.
And I was like, what? Oh my God.
No one expected this case to break on something like this.
Union Township, New Jersey. A bustling East Coast community with a small town feel.
Union Township's a mix of mostly suburban, but it's got its downtown area. It's peaceful, it's quaint, it's safe.
But all that changes on a cold November afternoon.
911, where is the emergency? I can't even think of the address right now. Okay, ma'am, listen to me. Take a deep breath. What's going on there? She's not answering. Can you tell me if she's breathing or not? No, she's not. Harry, please. Please, Harry.
After receiving a call from the victim's parents, the Union police responded immediately to the home. The father was across the street with the mom, and they were clearly in shock.
The couple tells police they found their daughter, Diane Zaleski, unresponsive inside.
When I got there, there was massive amounts of blood in the foyer. The walls were covered with blood spray. There was just blood everywhere.
We followed the blood trail into the basement and discovered the victim's body.
She had clearly been dragged to the basement.
You could see her at the bottom of the stairs. She was literally in a pool of blood. There were stab wounds all over her torso, her face, her neck.
There were defensive wounds on her arms and hands. We knew there was a struggle, no doubt. I never saw so much trauma to one person's body.
She was partially clothed. There was a pair of black underwear, literally right next to her head.
Had the victim been sexually assaulted as well? Investigators find more disturbing clues.
There were 2 empty containers of solvent by the woman.
It appeared that the body had been cleaned.
So this was an effort to obscure evidence.
The killer also tried to erase their tracks throughout the house.
The kitchen sink was full of soapy water, and inside was the remote controls, some cleaning brushes, and lots of various items that it appeared the suspect had touched.
Also, the garbage can was gone, which led us to believe that the killer got rid of DNA or blood evidence or fingerprints. The entire bathroom area was soaking wet. The shower head was not in its cradle. We thought the killer took a shower, so we pulled the drain to check for DNA.
The crime scene was, how I would describe it, Herculean.
Detectives can't find a murder weapon, but forensics discover what could be a crucial piece of evidence the killer failed to clean up.
There was a droplet of blood on the floor.
It appeared to be foreign to us. It was cast off and inconsistent with the victim's blood.
He had cut himself somehow in the course of the struggle, whether it be from a knife, from punching her.
We knew that the guy was trying to cover himself, but it was minute, and they found it. They saw that blood.
We immediately swabbed that piece of evidence and transported it to our DNA lab.
Detectives get more information from Diane's parents.
They had gone to the house because she was supposed to take a sister-in-law to a doctor's appointment that morning, and nobody could get in touch with her.
They entered her home, and they discovered Diane's body.
Her parents were really suffering.
Diane was a born and bred Jersey girl, gregarious and adored by her friends.
Diane, she brought joy to a lot of people's lives. Very positive, happy, laughing, and dancing. Even though she wasn't married and she didn't have children, she was very much focused on her family. Her parents were a little bit older, so she was kind of watching over them. And I knew her brother because he had lived with her for a while.
After 17 years of working as a legal secretary, Diane was now taking time for herself.
Here's this young single woman in her own house, and she's just retired. When she was offered a certain buyout package, there was no hesitation. She was ready. She had worked long and hard in her life. Diane was social. She had her friends from work, and often they'd go to happy hours. Then she had her dance friends. She would go on dates. She would just say, you know, Joanne, in the end, I'm just looking for a guy who can carry in my packages. She still had hope that she was going to meet somebody to spend life with.
As investigators finish processing the crime scene, a theory evolves.
There were no forced entry marks that we could find in the house. He took the time trying to obscure everything. He tried to clean her body. All this took time.
In addition, there was a pot that appeared to have food in it. Maybe Diane had been cooking or had been eating when her killer entered her home, and there was a fork from that pot that we found in the kitchen sink full of cleaning fluid, which led us to believe the suspect had also taken time to eat.
I was involved with at least 150 homicides. I never saw anyone hang out in a house after a murder. I just never heard of it.
We felt it was someone Diane knew.
The killer was very comfortable in this house after the death of the victim.
Which led us down the boyfriend road, or someone who was dating her road.
But what was the killer's motive?
For any human being to do this to another human being is, I don't even have a word for it.
Police rule out robbery since nothing appears to be stolen, including Diane's wallet. And when investigators look through it, they find a clue.
We found a business card.
It belongs to someone named Mark. Who is this man? And could he know anything about Diane's brutal murder?
We found out from her family that he lived in the general area, and it was a bar just up the street from where Diane lived. And we found out that they had been there. So we think that's where she actually got his business card. And because she was out there, she was dating, we wanted to speak to everybody. Maybe he had some information. He came in, and I showed him a picture of her, and he flat out refused to say that he even knew her. He said he had no idea why the card was in her wallet. And then he said, she's not the target I would usually go for. Target?
Coming up, old boyfriends with disturbing pasts.
There was a restraining order in effect.
Play cat and mouse with police.
That wasn't his real name. This guy was ducking us.
When an unexpected tip sparks a race to find the killer.
Oh, he was just a monster.
There was now an absolute manhunt.
Police investigating the gruesome murder of Diane Zaleski found a single business card in the victim's wallet. It belongs to a man named Mark. Investigators want to know if he and Diane recently met, and when detectives question him, they become suspicious.
The words that came out of his mouth about targets were very strange. His mannerisms and just the things he said, they were wrong. I don't call girls that I'm going to go out with targets. He had done something, maybe, to other women. He wouldn't tell us anything.
Detectives found a drop of blood at the crime scene that they believe belongs to Diane's killer. Could it be linked to Mark?
He refused to give DNA. Just out and out refused.
It was something that was concerning to us. Someone who's innocent usually is cooperative.
He had taken a bottle of water from us, and when he was finished, he wouldn't throw it out. He left. And he carried his bottle of water with him. So he obviously knew something about DNA. So I followed him. He walked about 2 blocks away from the building, and he threw it.
Detectives collect the bottle and send it in for testing. As news of the murder spreads.
I couldn't believe it. I just was like, oh my God. Oh my God. It was like a bad dream. I just couldn't believe that it was her. It was just so devastating.
Police fan across Diane's neighborhood, hoping someone saw something.
One older neighbor told us that earlier she had seen 2 children playing outside. And she knew one of the children lived in the neighborhood. She didn't know who the other child was. During the winter, she had seen him shoveling Diane's driveway.
Had the neighborhood kids witnessed anything out of the ordinary?
And so detectives wanted to identify those children. And when we spoke with the neighbor across the street from Diane, kind of diagonally, she said she had a daughter and a grandson. So those were the children identified as being outside.
All she could say is, I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. Her 11-year-old grandson didn't indicate anything else, and boom, the door gets closed and we're done with our canvas there.
But detectives do get information that raises some troubling new questions.
The neighbors told us that her garbage can was outside in the street, which led us to believe that the killer got rid of the garbage. How would he know that if he put the garbage out, it would be gone in the morning?
And why was the killer so desperate to get rid of it?
Was there evidence or fingerprints? We didn't know.
We contacted the local garbage company, and we unfortunately discovered that it was already in the incinerator.
When detectives reviewed Diane's autopsy report, they learned she was killed sometime between 10 p.m. and 1 the next morning.
The medical examiner determined the cause and manner of death to be homicide and multiple blunt force injuries. The wounds were too numerous to count.
The person that had done this was obviously very violent. Some person who had snapped.
Because the body had been clean, the medical examiner could not determine if there was any signs of sexual assault.
What she had to live through, it's gruesome. It's frightening. I struggle with why. Why did that happen to her? I don't understand that it was just a heinous crime.
A week after Diane's death, investigators get the results from the blood they suspect came from the killer at the scene.
We were able to obtain a DNA profile, and it was male.
We did enter the profile through a DNA data bank, and that came up negative.
So we knew we had the killer, we just didn't know who it was.
Will Mark be a match? Police have to wait another week to find out.
And he was negative.
Because DNA is the only piece of evidence police have to tie the killer to the scene, detectives need to find the match.
It was our goal to locate and interview every male individual that she was friends or romantically involved with and obtain a DNA sample. We discovered that there was over 100 male contacts in Diane's phone.
One of the first contacts detectives talked to is someone named Mike Prunell.
We showed him a picture of Diane. He was like, Mark denied ever knowing her. And okay, take people at their word.
Without anything linking Mike to Diane, detectives don't see any reason to question him further and let him go.
We are interviewing basically anybody and everybody, and we were coming up with nothing. We interviewed girlfriends just to get a feel of Diane, how she was, if she had mentioned guys she might have been dating.
I met the prosecutor, and he wanted to know everything about Diane and what I knew about her. There was always drama with boyfriends. We thought for sure that it was one of those bad boyfriends.
A familiar name comes up, Mike Prunell. But he had told police he didn't know Diane, so detectives do more digging.
You know, checking driver's license histories and criminal histories. You don't find Mike. We thought it was curious. We wanted to speak to him again, but he never returned a phone call. Every direction we followed, we ended up running into dead ends.
Why can't police find any records for Mike? And why did he lie about knowing Diane?
There was something out there that he was hiding.
When detectives ask Diane's brother Ron about Mike, what they hear completely surprises them.
Not only did he know her, but he asked Diane's father for her hand in marriage some 20 years prior. So he knew her real well. Another red flag.
Detectives investigating the murder of Diane Zaleski uncover shocking information about a prior person of interest. A man they interviewed, Mike Prunell, was adamant he didn't know the victim. But Diane's brother Ron tells police that's a lie.
We had found out Mike asked for her hand in marriage. He said Mike had an extensive history with her. He'd known her for at least 20 years. Prior to her move into the new house, she was renting an apartment from him for over a year. but he denied ever knowing her when I showed a picture of her to him.
Police discover more secrets and lies about Mike Prunell.
We found out that wasn't his real name, and when we did find out what it was, we ran his criminal history and we found out that he had domestic violence. And his wife at the time stated that he was beating her severely. He sat on her chest and was just pummeling her face to the point where her eye orbital was broken. So that sent flags off. We were totally convinced this was the guy, because he did beat his former wife. There was a restraining order in effect. And Diane was beaten so badly, this guy was pretty much ducking us. He wouldn't answer phone calls. It took us a little while to find him, but we did. Eventually, got him in again a second time.
But again, Mike won't admit he knows Diane.
He was being less than truthful. It's like, okay, you deny knowing her, you asked her to marry you. It's very suspicious.
He was lying, obviously. We never discovered the reason for that.
Getting nowhere, police take another approach.
We asked where he was, the time of the murder, and he couldn't give us an alibi. And we spoke to him in depth. He didn't give us any answers, nothing concrete.
Detectives can't hold him, but they don't want to let him go before getting one thing.
Eventually, he did consent to DNA. Our hopes are all raised.
We immediately transported it to our lab. We would get the result within 48 hours.
While they wait, Mike is released for the second time, and detectives work to place their suspect at the scene.
We found out that his brother ran a business close to Diane's house. Hopefully there was video evidence there for people that were coming and going. Somebody who worked there might have seen him. We interviewed everybody, but it didn't really drum up anything tangible. And there was absolutely no video surveillance at all. Nothing.
Detectives' next hope lies with the DNA results.
And it was negative. It wasn't a match.
We were feeling frustrated because we knew the killer was still out there. We had his profile. To say this wasn't a mountainous investigation is an understatement. We had to track down and obtain biological samples from close to 100 individuals.
We took swabs from her family members so that we could exclude them at some point as being the source of the DNA.
While searching through Diane's computer, forensic analysts discover new information.
We took her computer. There were several different things that we found.
Everything is time-stamped. Hours after Diane's death, there was activity on the PC.
Numerous items, technology items, were attempted to be purchased using Diane's credit card. It was someone that was comfortable having things delivered to Diane's house and it not being out of the ordinary if they were the ones collecting them.
We knew he tried to purchase an Apple computer, an iPhone, and it didn't go through. We had no idea why the purchase itself didn't go through.
We also found that the killer, while in the home, was also searching pornographic websites.
I mean, to go on pornographic websites after you just brutally killed a woman.
Waiting for justice takes a toll on Diane's friends.
Who could it be? Why is this so complicated? We watch the news all the time and we see these things, we see murders, but when it happens to somebody you know, it's devastating. It's sad. It made me very sad about humanity. That someone is so capable of doing something so brutal to someone that is so beautiful. Everyone that loved her wanted closure on this.
3 weeks after Diane's murder, detectives get results back from the crime lab that send the investigation in an unexpected direction.
We tested the black underwear found next to the decedent's head. DNA profile was collected. That DNA came back to her brother.
After 54-year-old Diane Zaleski is savagely murdered, detectives discovered DNA from the crime scene belongs to someone close to home.
The DNA that was in the pair of underwear lying next to Diane came back to Ron, her brother. A lot of things ran through all of our minds.
We just couldn't believe it.
We thought that there might have been something sexual with her brother, and she had enough. And he killed her, brutally killed his sister. Diane's brother worked for the Department of Public Works, so he would know when garbage was collected on her street.
The killer knew I can stay until the garbage is removed and then I'm safe to leave.
So there's a possibility that Diane's brother could have done it, collected all the evidence, and taken out the garbage. The killer was there for a long time. Diane's brother, he knew her pattern, her daily pattern. He would be comfortable staying on the scene, making themselves something to eat. I called him up that night and said, hey, do you got 10 minutes to come down and talk to me?
Ron agrees to come in the next day.
How do you say this without accusing the brother of basically having sex with his sister? Because that's what it leads you to believe. I have this report saying that Ron's semen was found in the underwear, so I just put the report on the desk and I slid it over to him and I said, what do you think? It's like he was hit by a freight train. The jaw drops. He said, I can't explain it. It can't be true. He went on about the wash and the laundry, that up until just prior to her death, she was doing laundry at her brother's house. I sort of left it at that. I said, we can keep this between us for now. I'll talk to you again in a couple days.
In the interim, detectives send Ron's DNA to compare with the blood spot found at the scene. They also get some crucial details from Ron's wife.
The wife said he was home with me, he couldn't have done this, he didn't do this. We asked specific pointed questions. She told us they weren't Diane's underwear, they were Ron's wife's underwear. They had the same size and brand of underwear. She did tell us that Diane had been doing laundry in their house. We also found out sperm can be resilient into the wash. So the sperm that was in the underwear could actually be from Diane's brother, and her sister-in-law and her underwear got mixed up. The whole family got by his side. After conducting all the interviews, we all came to the conclusion that he didn't do a thing.
There's hard proof of Ron's innocence when investigators find out his DNA isn't a match for the blood found at the scene.
The case took lots of twists and turns, and there were parts that were shocking to us where we had to kind of sit down and regroup. Diane was also on some dating websites, so we also had to attack that aspect of the case.
Could she have met someone sinister over the internet?
Online dating can be frightening. There are people who are really troubled, and if they come across your path, you are the victim.
Detectives focus on someone who called and texted Diane a lot.
Kyle came to our attention because he was in her phone. And Kyle was very evasive. Didn't want to come in for an interview. He was just a friend. He wasn't romantic with her at all. At least that's what he said.
But was that true? Or did Kyle want more than Diane's friendship?
Her circle of friends said he was a possible person of interest. And we acted on it. We followed up on it. He was not cooperative. We obtained subpoenas to go find them and bring him in for statements.
When he finally did come in for an interview and refused to give a DNA sample, I think it was too intrusive to him. And he asked a lot of questions. Normally, I'm the guy asking all the questions. So it gets your radar up a little bit that something's not exactly right with this guy. He actually said that he was at the house the week prior to her death, so he was familiar with the house, wanted a relationship with the victim. He denied that. We didn't believe that was true at all. People that I'd spoken to didn't think that he was her type. Maybe she laughed at him and told him to get out. Why else would he be evasive if he wasn't hiding something?
There were no signs of forced entry at all to the home. So Diane must have let this person into her home.
Was that person Kyle?
Maybe he didn't go there with the intent to kill, but maybe something flipped the switch.
Detectives want to know where Kyle was the night of the murder.
He said he works nights, and all the access in the building was key card controlled.
Detectives check logs. There is a record of Kyle swiping in.
But who's to say that somebody else wasn't using his key card? Until we got DNA, we'll just never know.
Investigators tell Kyle if he wants to be ruled out, he needs to cooperate.
We did eventually collect his DNA. He was negative. DNA set him free.
As weeks turn into months, investigators are far from uncovering the identity of Diane's killer.
We're hitting the year anniversary of Diane's death. It was very hard to explain to the family that we were no closer. You saw a family not being able to fully grieve because they didn't know who did this.
It was like a bad dream. I was worried. I said that they should have found someone by this time.
We knew the killer was out there. We were feeling frustrated. He would never be identified. That was our worst fear.
It's been a year since Diane Zaleski was found stabbed to death in her home, and police are no closer to solving her murder. To find her killer, detectives come up with a new strategy.
You usually try to piece together the victim's life, but we felt we needed to come at this from another angle and try to figure out who our suspect was.
Detective Henderson met with the FBI profile unit to identify what type of behavior a person may have done this to Diane.
We talked to psychologists, psychiatrists, and we hashed everything out. Where we went, why we went there, what did this lead, is there anything still open? We went through all the DNA, we went through all the interviews, we went through the whole case. You know, the person trying to buy stuff online, the pornography that was visited, everything. We laid out the whole case.
The profile came back to a loner, a petty thief, possibly, someone with psychological issues. Someone that was in her life, but not for a long time.
Age would have been younger. It would have been somebody that was into technology.
We realized that the individuals that we were speaking to did not fit that profile.
To catch the killer, investigators generate new leads.
One of the things was, on the year anniversary, do a media blitz. Local TV, local newspapers.
We just wanted to see whether or not it might stir the pot.
Detectives decide to release new information to the public.
So the things that we included in the press release, whoever killed Diane cleaned up after himself. We also said that we now have the killer's DNA on file.
And then we re-canvassed everywhere.
After a month, detectives have received a flurry of new tips. And one really grabs their attention.
Detective Rob Henderson received a phone call from an individual out of state indicating that she was on social media with an individual who was concerned about his well-being and his safety because he thought he was being investigated by police because of a serious crime he committed in New Jersey.
She tells me, I'm a stay-at-home mom. You may think I'm a little crazy, but I'm Facebook friends with this guy.
This woman was on Facebook and had met a person years earlier in a Facebook chat room and then eventually formed a friendship with this person. She explained to us that she had had conversations with him that were troubling to her.
She had said that he had told her that he had committed a murder.
This witness was very concerned for her family, but she said, if he had anything to do with this, I need to speak the truth.
We had been friends for about 3 or 4 years at that time. We used to chat through Instant Messenger all the time. He had a lot of different screen names. He called me his big little sister. He was 9 years younger than me. He told me he lived in New Jersey. He was fluctuating in and out of homelessness. He told me that he sold drugs and things like that, but I didn't feel like that was who he was. I think he was just doing it because he felt like he had to. Out of the blue, he's like, I did the worst thing you can think of. And I'm kind of sitting there thinking, like, what is he talking about? I don't know, a drug dealer getting killed. And I was like, what did you do? He said, they found DNA. And so I'm like, what do you mean they found DNA? While I was talking to him, I Googled some articles just to see if anything matched up with the story that he told me. And so I went online and I looked up murder, New Jersey DNA. And instantly an article came up.
She searched and she found the 1-year anniversary article. We put together to try to rekindle some interest in Diane's story.
I was shocked of what I did find. The article says that he tried to purchase an iPad with using her credit cards. The information that they put in the article matched what I knew about my friend. And a light bulb just went off in my head. I know that's him. It had to have been him.
She told us that he had been washing clothing at the home and that how he had literally been in his boxers cleaning.
She told me that he told her that he made himself dinner. Now, we did release certain things in the article about there was some food, but we didn't say he made himself a meal. We didn't provide that information, but he did.
We ended that phone call, and then within a matter of hours, we're booking a flight to visit her and to take some evidence from her. Upon meeting with her and looking at her computer and doing a forensic examination, we knew we had the right guy.
Detectives ask the woman for his name.
Nashon. That's what he called himself, because he didn't like his first name, Darnell.
She was a little nervous and a little hesitant, but eventually she gave us his full name.
Arnell Yearwood.
The last name gets detectives' attention.
We knew from our canvas that individuals with that same last name lived diagonally across the street from Diane.
When we look back at all the documented reports, it was determined that we had spoke to the killer's mother.
After over a year and a half investigating the grisly murder of Diane Zaleski, police finally get the break they need. They have the name of the suspected killer, Arnell Yearwood. And in a shocking twist, detectives discover his family actually lives on Diane's street, and they've been to the house.
We were there last year after one older neighbor told us that she had seen two kids playing outside. And she knew one of the children lived in the neighborhood. She didn't know who the other child was.
We did some more digging and some more investigation on Yearwood. Arnell Yearwood, although he was in his 20s, he was very small in stature. So he could be mistaken in a puffy jacket for a kid. We knew that Diane had some kids on the block helping shovel snow or do some yard work. It really led us to believe who was described as this kid was the killer. We went back across the street, made it look like we were canvassing other homes, but really we only had one home that we wanted information from, and that was his mother, Mrs. Yearwood. So we went to her home, said, "We know you have a son," and asked specific information about that son. And her daughter, who lived in the home, the mother of that child that was seen on the block, expressed to us that her brother, Arnell, had been at times living in the basement. And it would have been during the time frame of Diane's murder. That her brother sometimes would be outside with her own son.
Arnell's mother insists she has no idea where her 26-year-old son is.
We have to find this guy because we have to do a DNA match.
There was now an absolute manhunt.
A track and trace on Arnell's phone narrows down his position.
Somebody's got eyeballs on the house, and next thing you know, a kid starts walking down the street. Sure enough, it was Arnell Yearwood. And he was 5'1", 120 pounds, soaking wet, wearing winter clothes. Looked like a kid.
No one expected this.
We scooped him up, and we took him back to the office. He was nonchalant. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't think I was there then.
Detectives push harder, knowing they need to get a DNA sample from Arnell to compare to the crime scene.
He did consent, but after we took his DNA, then he stopped talking. My boss called me at 7 o'clock that night and said, "It's him."
On April 7th, 2012, police arrest Arnell Yearwood for the murder of Diane Zaleski.
He was charged and brought back to the homicide task force and questioned again.
This time, Arnell starts talking, and investigators can now piece together what happened the night of Diane's murder.
She let him in based on the fact that he was a neighbor.
He did small chores for Diane. The garbage, minor painting, cleaning around the house. He entered the house to collect money.
Diane looked at him as the nice neighbor kid that she was trying to help. He knocked on her door that night and she let him in because she thought he was harmless. He wanted a romantic relationship and things went bad, and he did not take kindly to being rejected.
She told him to get out, and that's when he said he took a pair of scissors and he started stabbing her. In the entrance right at the front door, that's where the first attack occurred. After he had her down on the ground, he was strangling her. He dragged her down the stairs and left her body dead at the bottom of the stairs. And then he went about his cleanup, and cleanup of him, cleanup of her, and his pornography watching. And at some point, he made himself something to eat.
But why would this kid brutally murder this vivacious woman?
The killer never talked about a motive, ever. And to prove a murder, you don't have to prove motive. We never identified what a motive was.
Whatever it was that caused him to act the way he did, so viciously, it will never be explained.
In court, Arnell Yearwood pleads guilty to the murder of Diane Zaleski. He is sentenced to 30 years in prison.
Oh, he was just a monster. I was disappointed, but I guess that's the maximum you can get. At least there was some accountability, because she deserved that. Her family deserved that.
The family made up black bracelets with white lettering that said "Justice for Diane, November 18th, 2010, which was the date she was murdered. And I wore that bracelet up until the day he pled guilty in court and went to jail. 2.5 years I wore that, and I didn't take it off.
Losing Diane is like a moment in life, like before Diane and after Diane. It's been quite a few years since she's gone, but I do still miss her. Her heart is still with me. She was so real and very kind, and she was funny. And every once in a while, I could feel her. I could feel her presence. And I think I look forward to seeing her someday again.
A generous soul.
She was a very giving person and a very sharing person.
Who helped neighbors in need.
When they needed extra money for baby food or diapers, Janora was always there.
Is found brutally murdered.
This homicide was one of the most violent homicides that I've worked.
There was blood from basically the floor to the ceiling.
It was something that shocked the community.
Police uncover a sinister trail of deception and hate.
He had some strange tendencies. He seemed to be stalking her.
The polygraph came back with some clear signs that he was being deceptive.
To unveil a killer no one expected.
He made her believe that he was her knight in shining armor, so she never saw it coming.
He had two completely different faces on him. He was just the devil incarnate.
One hot summer morning in the sleepy rural town of Clinton, Louisiana, the sheriff's office gets a call that sends them to a farmhouse just outside of town. It belongs to a woman named Janora Guillory.
When Janora didn't show up for work on Monday morning, her coworkers started to get nervous. They called her cell phone. She didn't answer. They called her landline, and it was busy. It stayed busy. At that point, a friend at work called the sheriff's office in East Feliciana and said, "Would you please go check on our coworker, Janora Guillory?"
The deputy that worked for the East Feliciana Sheriff's Office, he went to the residence to look for her. The door was unlocked. And he discovered the body.
He backed out of the house, and he said he threw up outside. He could barely even speak to the dispatcher. He was so upset by what he found.
Detectives are called to the scene.
You could tell something had happened at the very entrance of the door. There was blood right there on the door handle.
The blood on the floor leads detectives inside the house.
There, you could follow the blood trail, and it went into the kitchen. There were several knives that had blood on them inside of the drawer. There was also evidence like someone tried to use the phone, and there was blood on the side of the phone.
The blood leads to the bedroom, where detectives are met with a gruesome sight. In the middle of the floor lies the lifeless body of 42-year-old Janora Guillory.
You could
see evident tears in her skin, which, I mean, we knew at the time were deep stab wounds. She was beaten severely. There was blood from basically the floor to the ceiling.
The lamp was broken and stuff knocked over in the bedroom.
I've seen other homicides that I've worked that this one was more brutal.
The body was also half closed, legs opened, and she was pinned against the wall. There was a possibility that she had been raped.
Detectives in this small parish don't investigate many homicides, let alone one this brutal. They call in the Louisiana State Police to help process the scene.
They took some DNA samples of the material that was found under her fingernails.
The samples are sent to the lab to see if there are any traces of the killer's DNA.
We didn't find any type of murder weapons. We found that it was actually no forced entry. We pretty well figured that it was somebody that she knew and had a little bit of trust in to open the door.
As police collect evidence, Janora's neighbors, Philip and Amy Skipper, arrive on the scene.
They were, of course, shocked. Philip's wife, Amy, she was really destroyed, and she was the friend of Miss Guillory's.
Police inform Janora's family. Her brother-in-law, Albert, is the first to get the terrible news.
I received a call from the sheriff's office indicating that Janora was dead, had been murdered, and obviously it was just an unbelievably bad moment. To Janora's sister, my spouse at that time, Yvonne, that was probably the single most devastating moment in her life.
The family rushes to the scene. When they arrive, detectives ask them for any details they can provide about Janora.
Janora grew up in Eunice, Louisiana, a small town in St. Landry Parish. From the time that Janora was a young girl in school, she was a very giving person. She was a very intelligent woman, filled with love for life, filled with love for animals.
Janora worked at an insurance company in Baton Rouge, but chose to live in rural Clinton, where she could indulge in her passion for animals.
She had 30 dogs, she had 3 or 4 horses, she had rescue animals, she took care of friends' animals if they couldn't. Animals were a big part of her life.
Friends were a big part of Janora's life too. She was thrilled when a sweet couple moved in across the street, and they immediately hit it off.
Philip and Amy Skipper moved into her neighborhood, and I felt very comfortable that she had developed this warm relationship with the Skippers.
Over the years, Janora and her neighbors became close friends.
Janora told me how reliable they were and how hardworking they were.
Janora really liked her neighbors, and she thought of the Skippers almost like family.
Now her friends are heartbroken over Janora's violent death, and police are faced with the puzzle of finding her killer.
It made no sense. Janora had no enemies, and she wasn't involved in anything shady or suspicious.
When the autopsy report comes back the next day, it concludes that the murder took place between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. It also reveals just how brutal Janora's final moments were. She was shot 5 times with a .22 caliber gun and stabbed 5 times. But neither of these attacks caused her death.
A severe blow to the back of the head severed her brainstem from her body. She was actually alive, and she was fighting back and was stabbed and shot.
This was one of the most violent homicides that I've worked. It was a very much overkill, which usually means it is a crime of passion.
This was a particularly brutal, dastardly deed. We all stood outside Janora's house that morning and talked about who could possibly have done this.
Despite the concern of Janora's family and friends, detectives can't rule out anyone as a suspect.
We began talking to the neighbors and co-workers, the ones that showed up, and just started trying to get information.
One person in particular draws investigators' attention. Janora's neighbor, Philip Skipper.
Philip was real calm. What really got me was his over wanting to help too much, you know. We just had a feeling Philip knew something.
Coming up, investigators uncover a dark obsession.
He was infatuated with her and couldn't take no for an answer.
And menacing secrets.
They called her names behind her back all the time, but never to her face.
There was an incentive for them to actually murder her.
That leads them to a suspect they never expected.
They went on a tour of the murder scene, and he described the whole thing.
He just blurted out, "Do you have a woman named Mrs. G that was murdered over there?"
After 42-year-old Janora Guillory is found savagely killed in her home, detectives in Clinton, Louisiana suspect that her neighbor, Philip Skipper, might know something about the murder.
Philip was over helpful at the crime scene, and it is something that we wanted to check out more.
Police decide to bring in Philip Skipper and his wife, Amy, for an interview.
Janora really liked her neighbors, and the Skippers had a young child, and their stepson, who was 15 years old at the time.
Philip Skipper tells investigators that when his young family first moved to Clinton, they were down on their luck, but their neighbor Janora kindly helped out.
She started to take them under her umbrella and make sure that they had food and made sure that they had electricity.
When the Skippers needed extra money for baby food or diapers, Janora was always there. The trailer they were living in, for example, was really dilapidated, so Janora helped them buy a new trailer. She helped them improve their lives as much as she could.
Janora's kindness didn't stop there.
She started to employ Philip to do all of the work in her yard and around the house, and employed Amy Skipper to do the work inside her house.
Janora treated the Skippers like family and trusted them with keys to her property.
She was just a very, very generous neighbor.
Detectives want to know if the Skippers ever argued with Janora. Amy Skipper said their relationship had recently been strained by an unfortunate incident.
Philip Skipper was raising pit bulls, and there was one dog that was not a pit that didn't get along with his other pit bulls, and Janora agreed to keep that in her kennel with her dogs. Well, that dog somehow got loose during the day while Janora was at work. The dog ran back to the Skipper's trailer and killed a goat. They kept as a pet. Amy Skipper ran over to Janora's house, got on the phone, called Janora at work, and was upset with Janora. Now that's witnessed by a couple of Janora's co-workers who heard Janora's end of the conversation. She was crying by the end of this phone call. That's how upset Janora was. And Janora told Amy Skipper on the phone, "Leave the key at my house, get out of my house, and never come back."
When police question Philip about the conflict, he tells them that he and Amy had since patched things up with Janora, and they were back on friendly terms.
Philip Skipper was dismissive about the falling out. He said it was just a dispute among neighbors, and they worked it out, and there was no lingering after effects.
Police are skeptical about Philip's version of events, and when they notice scratches on his arms, they wonder if they were made by Janora while trying to fight for her life.
Questioned him about that. He said it was from him and his stepson wrestling in the yard.
Not convinced by his story, investigators ask Philip where he was on the night of the murder.
And he said he was asleep at the time that the murder happened.
To confirm Philip's story, police ask to interview his 15-year-old stepson, John Ballio.
When you interview the juveniles in Louisiana, you have to have permission of the guardian or the parent, which we had. I mean, they did cooperate there and let us talk to them.
When detectives question John, they notice scratches on his arms too. Is it possible Janora fought back against two attackers?
John Ballio had marks on him. He gave us the same story.
John corroborates his stepdad's story. But police are still suspicious.
The marks on their arms was really something that we wanted to check out more if they was being truthful. So after that interview, we did decide to have a polygraph set up.
Philip and John agree to take the test, but before it can be scheduled, investigators uncover a critical detail.
During the course of the investigation, we did learn about an insurance policy Miss Guillory had taken out on herself, and the money would go to the Skippers.
Was an insurance payout reason enough for the Skippers to kill their friend and neighbor?
With a lack of motive, it's really hard to find the killer.
The insurance policy was an incentive for them to actually murder her.
Police have just discovered that murder victim Janora Guillory's neighbors, the Skipper family, are the beneficiaries of Janora's $25,000 life insurance policy.
And it's just kind of unusual that the neighbor would have an insurance policy and list the other neighbor as a beneficiary. They're not related.
The insurance policy raises eyebrows for investigators, but Janora's family is well aware of the policy and does not suspect foul play.
Janora wanted to make sure that the Skippers had the food that they needed, had the clothing that they needed for at least a period of time, should she meet an untimely departure. The Skippers, after Janora's death, did not know how to collect. They contacted me and asked me to assist them, and I did.
Still, police believe the insurance money is a possible motive. That, coupled with the scratches on Philip and John's arms, convinces detectives to take the next step.
Philip Skipper and John Ballio showed up at the Baton Rouge Police Department, which has a polygraphy unit, and they both took separate polygraph tests.
The polygraph interrogator asked 15-year-old John Ballio for an alibi.
John Ballio said he was at home asleep when the murders occurred.
Both John and Philip are asked about their knowledge of the murder by the examiner. And when their responses are analyzed, detectives are surprised by the results.
Both of their tests came back with no real signs of deception.
The results on the polygraphs, they was inconclusive, and the officer that was doing the polygraph didn't think that they had done the murder.
The results are a blow to the investigation, and lead detectives drop the Skippers as suspects.
We still didn't have no physical evidence. And the polygraph made us think, well, we need to start looking elsewhere.
Detectives interview Janora's friends and coworkers about anyone she may have dated recently.
A friend of Miss Guillory's did give us the name of Tommy Alexandra.
Police track down Tommy at his home in a nearby town. He agrees to talk to police. Tommy tells investigators that he met Janora months prior at a feed store, where she was stocking up on food for her animals. Janora agreed to meet Tommy for a drink, their first of several dates.
Tommy and Janora had dated on and off for some time.
But it soon became apparent to Janora that Tommy had other love interests.
It turned out Tommy Alexander was not just dating Janora at the time. He was dating a couple of different women.
Janora really liked him, but Tommy didn't want to settle down. He wasn't going to commit to one woman.
Is it possible that an argument between Janora and Tommy could have turned deadly?
We interviewed Tommy about the homicide.
On the night Janora was murdered, Tommy says that he was at home. Police talk to his girlfriend, who confirms his alibi.
They were able to eventually eliminate him as a suspect. As far as physical evidence to tie a specific suspect to the scene, there really wasn't anything. They kept trying to dig for facts, but they were hampered by the fact that, once again, they couldn't figure out why anyone wanted to kill her.
Determined to get justice for Janora, investigators interview her coworkers and discover that she had an ongoing conflict with a man in her life.
We learned about another friend, Steve Williams, from co-workers, and basically what we learned is that he wanted to date Miss Guillory.
But the feeling is not mutual.
Steve Williams managed to persuade Janora to go out one time, and that was enough for her. She didn't want to go out with him again, and she let him know. But he didn't take that no very well.
Miss Guillory had really got concerned about him, according to her friends. He would sit out in the parking lot and wait for her to get off from work, would show up unannounced.
Steve Williams showed up out of the blue while she was working her horses.
He pursued her a little more aggressively than was comfortable for the family.
From co-workers' explanations over there, he seemed to be stalking Janora.
Janora said, "He's bothering me and he needs to stop."
When detectives look into Steve Williams, they're shocked to learn that their potential suspect is one of their own.
Steve Williams was a Baton Rouge police officer.
Detectives have learned that Steve Williams, who had been repeatedly contacting Janora Guillory in the months before her murder, is a fellow police officer.
Steve Williams had recently gotten a job with the Baton Rouge Police Department, and he was a probationary police officer in the next jurisdiction over.
He was infatuated with her, and he was just a guy who couldn't take no for an answer.
Janora's friends knew that she was not interested, and of course after the murder, When the police are asking, well, who may have been upset with Janora, he became a focus of investigation.
When you investigate law enforcement officers, it's harder than most because they know the law as good as you do. But we did have good cooperation through Baton Rouge City Police Department. Whatever we needed, they was willing to provide.
As investigators gather more information about Steve, they uncover an intriguing tip from one of his colleagues, 29-year-old officer Tabitha McCants.
Tabitha came forward during the investigation, and she had worked with Steve Williams at Baton Rouge Police Office.
It turns out she got kind of a bad vibe from him.
Tabitha tells investigators that she overheard Steve having heated phone conversations with a woman on several occasions while at the police shooting range.
She said they'd make multiple phone calls.
Police need to check Janora's phone records to find out if Janora was the person Steve had been calling. Tabitha also tells investigators that Steve mentioned shooting targets at his mother's home. And when they ask Tabitha if Steve mentioned the type of gun he used, her answer sets off alarm bells.
She says he used a .22, which by this time we found out that .22 was used in the shooting of Miss Guillory.
As a police officer, of course, Steve Williams had firearms. The .22 caliber pistol, which is certainly not a police gun, but he did have a .22, and he shot it at his mother's house.
Based on the history of him stalking Miss Guillory and the access to a .22, that's when we decided that we would check Steve Williams out a little bit more.
When detectives check Janora's phone records, they quickly discover an alarming pattern.
Looking at the phone records, Steve Williams, in my opinion, was stalking Miss Guillory.
The phone records showed 35 calls to Janora's home from the shooting range in 4 months, and an escalating pattern of calls and messages.
Steve Williams had left several messages for Janora the weekend that she was killed. In fact, he told her in a message that he was stopped by her house on the day she was killed.
Investigators don't waste a second bringing Steve in for questioning, and when they do, his demeanor has them instantly suspicious.
Steve was real nervous. It was just something about him like he was hiding something from us.
Steve insists he had nothing to do with Janora's murder and claims he stayed at his mother's house the night Janora was killed.
Steve's mama's residence, about 40 minutes away from where the homicide was.
Police believe Janora was murdered between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. Could Steve have slipped out undetected while his mother was sleeping?
Janora was shot with a .22 caliber pistol, and the fact that he had a .22, was nearby on the day she was killed, it really put him very high up on the suspect list.
That's when we had him take a polygraph.
Steve's answers are analyzed, and the results sent to detectives.
Steve Williams' polygraph examination came back with some clear signs that he was possibly being deceptive.
His polygraph basically told us that he may have known something about the murder. Made me really think that he had something to do with this. That's when Steve advised he wasn't going to talk to us no more. He wanted a lawyer.
Despite Steve's refusal to cooperate, detectives continue to investigate him.
He looked like a good suspect. Now the question would be, can they find the evidence to prove it? They got a warrant for his house, they got warrants for his personal cars, and they got a warrant for his police car. Now, to do that, they had to work with the Baton Rouge Police Department. And the detectives were hoping to recover a .22, knife, anything with blood stains, anything to link him to the crime scene. They didn't find anything.
It's a major setback. But detectives still have one last piece of forensic evidence that they believe could connect Steve Williams to the murder. They get a search warrant for a DNA sample from Steve to see if it's a match for genetic material found on Janora's body.
We had those fingernail scrapings that were taken off her from the State Police Crime Lab.
It was determined, yes, there was some male DNA under her fingernails.
Coming up, investigators zero in on a vicious killer.
I picked out the worst photo that I could find of the crime scene, and I threw it in front of his face and made him look at it and said, did she deserve it?
Police hope to use DNA evidence to link Baton Rouge police officer Steve Williams to Janora Guillory's murder. Steve's DNA is compared to material found under Janora's fingernails.
His DNA was not actually determined to be under her fingernails.
The DNA also doesn't match any known criminals in the FBI database.
The fingernail scrapings came back to unknown male genetic profile.
With no physical evidence linking Steve Williams to the crime, he's ruled out as a suspect, leaving investigators at a standstill.
The case had gone cold, and they had no other leads to check into.
The case stays cold for an entire year.
There was great disappointment and great frustration on the part of the family when the case went cold.
The shock of Janora's murder may have faded, but the community lives in fear of a killer who's still at large.
When a murder occurs, it's very alarming. Everybody's on edge, especially after the case was at a standstill.
Then, on July 27, 2001, a tip comes in that changes everything.
And I got a call on the telephone straight to the office. It was Detective Mark Apperson from Tangipahoa Sheriff's Office. And he just blurted out. He's like, do you have a woman named Mrs. G that was murdered over there? And I just kind of looked over at Don and I said, yeah, we do have a woman named Miss G that was killed.
The detective there was working a domestic violence battery, and the victim had came in and told him that her boyfriend knew something about a murder in Clinton.
The woman tells detectives her boyfriend's name is Donnie Fisher.
We rode over there and found Donnie Fisher. We brought him over there to the Tangipahoa Sheriff's Office.
But Donnie Fisher is not in the mood to talk.
You could tell he knew something. That's when I picked out the worst photo that I could find of the crime scene, and I threw it in front of his face and made him look at it and said, did she deserve it?
Reluctantly, Donnie looks down at the gruesome photos, and moments later, his whole demeanor changes.
He started to break down and cry. And he looked at it and then he told us, basically, his confession.
Donnie says he heard a detailed account of the murder from one of Janora's neighbors.
The neighbor took Donnie Fisher on a tour of the murder scene.
He said once they got there, he took them and said, this is how it happened.
Investigators are stunned. They question all of Janora's neighbors at the outset of the investigation, but it didn't uncover any useful information or lead to an arrest. Detectives demand that Donnie reveal the neighbor's name.
He said it was John Ballio, Philip Skipper's stepson.
Detectives are shocked. They press Donnie for details. And he claims that John told him about the murder while cleaning up Janora Guillory's house.
Janora Guillory's family had hired John Ballio to go clean up the crime scene. Donnie Fisher, he was out there helping, so As they're cleaning up the house, John Ballio was bragging to Donnie Fisher about how he killed Janora Guillory. John Ballio took Donnie and said, here's what we did here, here's what we did here, and he described the whole thing.
Investigators don't know whether to believe Donnie's story, especially since John Ballio's polygraph was considered truthful. Yet every word of it lines up with the evidence.
John actually showed Donnie how Miss G ran through the house, and talking to Donnie, he described everything that we'd put together from what we seen at the crime scene.
Detectives want to know, why would Ballio want Janora dead after all she had done for his family?
Miss Guillory would rather help somebody than hurt somebody, you know. She would do anything she could to help the Skippers.
It's kind of heartbreaking.
Police now believe that Donnie is telling the truth, so they quickly file an arrest warrant.
We picked up John Ballio late on a Friday evening, and we brought him back to East Police Center Sheriff's Office for the charges of first-degree murder.
Investigators now believe the key to cracking this case is a confession from the alleged killer. Luckily, a recent change in Louisiana state law allows them to question a minor accused of murder without a lawyer or guardian present.
The police had to get John Ballio to come clean and tell the truth.
We brought him to my office and advised him of his rights.
He bounced from here to there during his statements at first when we initially questioned him. And then we started talking about the brutality of this homicide.
After probably an hour and a half interviewing, he finally came and told the story about how he killed Miss G.
But first, Ballio needs to get something off his chest.
He didn't do it by himself.
Pointing the finger right back at Philip Skipper.
Detectives are speechless. John Ballio just implicated his stepdad, Philip, in the murder of Janora Guillory. And that's not all.
He pointed to several other people, too.
Detectives in Clinton, Louisiana have just arrested Philip Skipper's stepson, John Ballio, for the murder of 42-year-old Janora Guillory.
John started basically telling us how this went down.
And John claims he didn't act alone. He points the finger at his stepdad, Philip Skipper, and two other people.
Johnny Hoyt was a brother-in-law to Philip Skipper, and Lisa Skipper Hoyt was a sister to Philip Skipper. He said they killed this woman together.
Lisa and Johnny, that's the first time their name had ever came up. And we were, of course, shocked.
John Ballio gave a detailed confession on videotape to exactly what happened.
John claims that Philip, Johnny, and Lisa had formed a white supremacist gang called the Brotherhood, and that killing Janora was meant to be John's initiation into the group.
It would be my true test of brotherhood.
It was a skinhead gang. Actually, they were very anti-black and neo-Nazi.
Philip Skipper, he had two completely different faces on him. I mean, he had the one he presented to Janora Guillory, which was, the nice neighbor. And then behind her back, he called her all kind of names. He hated black people.
He basically made her believe that he was her knight in shining armor. She never saw it coming.
Killing Janora would not only initiate Ballio into their gang, but also bring a financial windfall.
Philip Skipper was smart enough to figure out that, hey, if she doesn't like us anymore, it's not going to be very long before she changes that insurance policy and names someone else as beneficiary.
Ballio tells detectives that on the night of the murder, the group had been drinking heavily. They arrived at Janora's door at 2 a.m.
When we got there, Lisa walked up to the door and knocked on it and told Miss G that she needed some money to get the baby some diapers.
And Miss G cracked the door open. That's when Johnny hit her and forced his way in there.
They just jumped on her like a pack of hyenas.
She ran through the house, down the hall, screaming for him to leave her alone. And she ran into the kitchen and got to the knife drawer trying to get her knife so she could cut him to make him leave her alone.
Eventually, she ran to her bedroom.
John told us that they took turns stabbing her, and they took turns beating her, and they took turns shooting her.
And then somebody threw the final blow that, according to the medical examiner, killed her instantly. It was a blow with a bat to the head.
Philip started hitting her with the bat. And after Miss G stopped breathing, they started raping her.
John Ballio said that they used condoms. There was not an indication of any seminal fluid or any semen at the scene that night.
With no evidence to back up John Ballio's claim of sexual assault, the rape charges are dropped. But detectives are still determined to bring Janora's killers to justice.
John Ballio's confession gave us enough probable cause to make sure this case got prosecuted.
For cooperating with police, John is given a deal. He pleads guilty to second-degree murder and receives a juvenile life sentence to expire when he turns 21. Lisa Hoyt also takes a plea agreement and is sentenced to 25 years. That leaves Johnny Hoyt and Philip Skipper to face justice in separate trials. When news of the arrests gets out, Janora's family is devastated.
When the family found that Philip and John were involved, they were really, really upset and angry that the people that Janora had taken care of so diligently were the ones involved in her murder.
The prosecutors are determined to bring Janora's killers to justice. But they have a problem. There's no concrete evidence linking either Philip or Johnny to the crime scene.
There was some male DNA under her fingernails, but it did not match the samples that we had from the 3 males in this case.
Both cases rest entirely on the testimony of John Ballio.
John Ballio walked us through what happened that night, and that was crucial for our case. He actually brought everything together and made the whole situation make sense to a jury. It was Philip Skipper's trial. The jury came back with a unanimous verdict. He was guilty of second-degree murder.
Philip Skipper is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Philip's wife, Amy, is not charged with any crime.
A lot of times people ask, what about Amy? What about Amy? Amy Skipper had no idea what her husband was doing.
I genuinely believe that Amy Skipper did not have any knowledge of what was going to take place. I believe that she had nothing to do with this.
Johnny Hoyt was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years without the possibility of parole. But for the family of Janora Guillory, no punishment could possibly make up for the pain they suffered in the wake of her murder.
Janora's father died of a broken heart. It was just a very, very difficult time for everyone in that family. I'd like for people to remember Janora as we knew her, warm and happy, and someone who would give the shirt off her back to anyone who needed it. we are all happy to have had our lives enriched by her passage through this life.
A beloved father and devoted basketball coach.
Jimmy loved kids.
He loved to talk about coaching basketball and God.
Ruthlessly gunned down in his own home.
There were 10 shell casings. Whoever did this wanted to make sure that he was dead.
Leaving a whole community devastated.
I just started screaming. I literally just lost it.
Detectives follow evidence down a twisted trail.
It was what we call a whodunit. All the doors were locked to some fashion.
There was muddy footprints coming into the foyer area.
To uncover a number of suspects.
He immediately lawyered up. He didn't want to talk about anything.
He had just filed for divorce before he was killed.
Was there some sort of romantic thing gone awry?
And unveil a killer no one could have ever imagined.
They had no remorse, no confessions.
You saying that you killed him?
It shocked me very, very much. This could happen to anybody.
Cordova is a peaceful suburb just east of Memphis, Tennessee. Its wide open spaces and strong church communities make it a haven for families.
Cordova is one of those very safe neighborhoods. Kids riding up and down to the bikes. You honk at your neighbor and your neighbor waves.
It's not a place that we're accustomed to seeing violent crimes.
But in the winter of 2013, the town's carefree spirit is disrupted by a troubled call to police.
The initial call came on a Friday morning from the principal at Ridgeway High School.
Jimmy McClain had not reported to work. He was a school teacher and a basketball coach.
Jimmy was always punctual, so when he didn't show up for work, people immediately started worrying about Jimmy.
Our patrol officers go over there and they knocked on the door. Nothing. The front door was locked, the back door was locked, the garage door was shut, all the windows were locked. Nothing appeared to be opened or broke. And then one officer was able to look in through some glass doors. And then he saw something that looked like a shell casing.
Immediately on alert, officers quickly force entry into the home.
As soon as they made entry, they saw a black male on the floor with a lot of blood around him. Dead.
Homicide investigators are on the scene within minutes.
When I first arrived, we see a male victim laying in the den area of the house who appeared to have been shot multiple times.
Whoever did this wanted to make sure that he was dead.
Detectives find a wallet in the victim's pocket. The ID inside confirms this is 49-year-old Jimmy McClain.
The big thing that stood out at that time was the numerous shell casings that were scattered throughout the living portion of the residence.
There were 10 shell casings, and they were all the same caliber, 40 caliber, but they were two different brands. That puts a theory in your head. Was there two shooters, one brand in one gun, one brand in the other? Or was it just one shooter with mixed rounds?
Detectives can find no murder weapon at the scene, but something else grabs their attention.
There was muddy footprints coming into the foyer area, which we knew were not any of our officers' prints.
We were able to lift those prints.
I truly was hoping we could identify the type of shoe and the actual size of the shoe.
There were no signs of fingerprints to the naked eye, so we were able to swab the doorknobs, both interior and exterior on the front door, for the presence of DNA.
An exhaustive search of the house yields no sign of forced entry.
We had no signs of robbery, no signs of burglary. The big thing to me was all the doors were locked to some fashion. Meaning someone locked the door on their way out upon leaving the scene. That told me that most likely our suspect had a key to the residence.
So once we realized that somebody had let themselves in, we're like, well, who's got access to these keys? Did Jimmy know the person who did this?
Detectives also attempt to discover the approximate time the murder happened.
We were able to find out there was a shots fired call that came in our dispatch around 8:50 p.m. 2 days before we found the body.
So started making sense real quick, though, that that's probably when this happened.
As police continue their investigation at the scene, Jimmy's sister, Easter, arrives.
To this day, that is the absolute worst day of my life. It's the day I came around the corner and saw yellow tape around my baby brother's house, who I love so dearly. The police asked me, "Ma'am, do you know who lives here?" I said, "My brother is my brother. Where's my brother?"
Officers confirm Easter's worst fears and tell her that her brother has been killed.
I just started screaming, just started just howling.
Detectives ask Easter and Jimmy's mother, Jamela, to come downtown. Through her tears, Easter tells detectives how young Jimmy grew up to be such a beloved figure.
We grew up in eastern Arkansas. Jimmy is the fourth of 8 kids. He was intelligent, precocious, very athletic.
From a young age, Jimmy McClain had a passion for basketball.
Jimmy walked tall, slender, like a greyhound. He's real tight muscle, flexible, agile.
His nickname was Full Time because he never played half speed. He always played full speed, and that's how he took life.
Jimmy had played basketball with Scottie Pippen. Jimmy considered Scottie Pippen a friend, and I think it was likewise.
After 7 years of professional basketball, Jimmy took up coaching.
Jimmy loved teaching and mentoring. He just was a natural leader with youth.
Jimmy had found his calling, but one part of his life remained unfulfilled.
The thing that he talked to me the most about was his desire to be married.
In the late 1990s, Jimmy met the partner he'd always dreamed of. Her name was Carla.
He was very happy, very excited. He took his relationship very seriously. The next summer, they got married.
Jimmy also became a father to Carla's 2 children from a previous relationship, 16-year-old Tiffany and 11-year-old Dwayne.
He never had children, so he was looking forward to being a father. They all looked up to him as a mentor and as a father, and he spent a lot of time trying to be sure that they were on a good path. He talked to me a lot about the things he was going to do with Dwayne and Tiffany, and he especially wanted to involve Dwayne in summer basketball camps and so forth. He was very serious about being a good husband and a good father.
Together with Carla, Jimmy raised Dwayne and Tiffany as his own. But after 8 years of marriage, cracks started to show in their relationship.
Carla wanted the divorce at first. I do believe that the problems were related to something that occurred early on in their relationship.
Initially, Jimmy had resisted the idea.
I overheard Jimmy telling her that it doesn't make sense for us to be separated There's nothing wrong. We're not having problems.
But eventually, Carla and Jimmy split up, and after 4 years of separation, Jimmy finally agreed to make it official.
I don't think I really got the full story about exactly what changed his mind and his heart toward her. But he had just filed for divorce a couple of weeks before he was killed.
Detectives are suspicious. Was the timing just a coincidence? Or did Jimmy's looming divorce have something to do with his murder?
We immediately thought we needed to talk to Carla.
Had Jimmy and Carla been in some sort of argument or confrontation?
Coming up, detectives unearth disturbing clues.
There had been a scandal at the high school.
Why are these numbers erased during the same time period as the homicide?
And the truth blindsides everyone.
We had found the needle in the haystack.
They had admitted to killing a basketball coach.
Police have just learned that Jimmy McClain filed for divorce 2 weeks before he was killed. And now detectives need to know if animosity between Jimmy and his soon-to-be ex-wife Carla could have been a motive for murder.
We had asked, Carla and Tiffany and Dwayne, her biological children, to come down.
Dwayne and Tiffany wait in the next room while police talk to Carla, starting with her relationship with Jimmy.
She says, look, we were going through a divorce, but it wasn't because he was doing anything bad. She said that we fell out of love.
Carla tells police that when she and Jimmy were married in 2001, Jimmy treated her kids, Dwayne and Tiffany, like they were his own. But as they grew into their late teens, Carla and Jimmy's parenting styles started to clash.
Carla did advise that Jimmy was really hard on her kids. Jimmy was very discipline-oriented, and she always took the side of the kids. In her eyes, they could do nothing wrong. She wasn't going to let Jimmy over-discipline. And some of the issues is what transformed into this growing away from each other.
Detectives ask Carla directly if she stands to gain from Jimmy's death.
She did advise that she had a life insurance policy through her work where Jimmy was on the policy and she would have been the beneficiary.
Was the life insurance payout a motive for Carla to kill Jimmy? Knowing evidence from the crime scene suggests the killer let themselves in. Detectives need to find out if Carla still had access to Jimmy's home.
We actually did ask Carla if she had a key to the house, and she did not have a key that she could remember.
Undeterred, they ask where Carla was on the night of the murder.
She didn't go out and do anything. She said it was raining that night. It was nasty weather. She actually went to her bedroom and read a book. We asked if anybody could verify that. She said, well, my son, Dwayne, because he was at home as well.
To confirm Carla's alibi, police bring in Dwayne and Tiffany, who are waiting in the next room.
When we saw Dwayne, he's a 19-year-old, kid. Dwayne gave a statement advising to us that, when his mom came home, that he just sat and chilled at the house. He didn't have a cell phone, so he would use his mom's. His mom said that she was down in his bedroom. He said he was up in his bedroom, and they didn't see each other the rest of the night.
Dwayne's account lines up with Carla's, but detectives are curious about whether Dwayne had any conflicts with Jimmy.
Tell me about Jimmy. How was y'all's relationship?
It was cool, but we bumped heads a little bit sometimes. He was straight up in the night. He was cool. He fun, loving person.
Dwayne just was like, I can't believe this happened. I don't know who would have done this.
Police turn their attention to his sister Tiffany, and right away sense some tension.
When we interviewed Tiffany, she admitted her and Jimmy butted heads on things, and she actually moved out. She didn't like being parented by him.
Detectives ask where she was at the time of the murder.
Advised she was at home with her boyfriend during the time frame all that Wednesday evening. So at the time we got through interviewing Carla, Tiffany, and Dwayne, there was not anything to lead us to believe that they had any involvement with the death of Jimmy.
To help confirm their alibis, detectives ask for Carla and Tiffany's cell phones.
We were going to use the technology of the cell phone pinging to corroborate where they were the night of the murder.
While they wait for those results, detectives canvass Jimmy's friends and colleagues to find out who else might have had a key to his house.
Early on in the investigation, we had to look at everything. With Jimmy being a high school teacher, with Jimmy being a basketball coach, there was multiple people that could have done this.
We had to start going back to who knew Jimmy. And the first thing we did was work. We spoke with all the teachers liked Jimmy, other coaches liked Jimmy, the principal liked Jimmy.
Detectives can find no one with a key or even a bad word to say about Jimmy.
He was the kindest, gentlest, most compassionate person that I know. But for somebody to snatch your loved one from you out of their own selfish reasons, it really is heartbreaking, and it makes you mad.
3 days into the investigation, detectives receive Jimmy's cell phone back from forensics and discover that he was texting shortly before he was killed.
He was texting with a female subject, and they were back and forth talking about some directions and basically good night. The last text we identified as a subject named Pam Smith.
The name is new to police, but when they compare the time of her last text with the report of gunshots on the night of the murder, they realize they were just minutes apart. With this new lead, Pam Smith becomes detectives' newest suspect. Who is she? And was she involved in Jimmy's murder?
When you read the text messages between her and Jimmy, the lingering question had to be, was there some sort of, romantic thing gone awry?
Detectives have just discovered that Jimmy McLean was texting with a woman named Pam Smith on the night he was murdered.
We were able to determine that Pam was the last person that Jimmy had contacted.
Investigators need to speak to Pam to see if she has any information that points to the killer.
We called just to say, this is the sheriff's office. Do you know Jimmy? And she was like, yeah, that's my boyfriend.
Detectives inform Pam of Jimmy's murder and carefully gauge her response.
She was extremely distraught. She was like, do I need to come down there? What do I need to do? We still had to figure out who she was. Is she married? Is there an affair situation? Is this a boyfriend, girlfriend situation?
Pam tells detectives that she and Jimmy had only been dating for 6 months.
We were able to sort of dig into the relationship between Pam and Jimmy. What seemed like a healthy relationship.
Pamela claims she was 3 hours away in Nashville at the time of the murder, and she's more than happy to turn over her phone so police can verify her statement.
After talking to her, there was nothing that she gave any kind of suspicion or anything.
Detectives have one more question for Pamela.
We actually did ask Pam if she had a key to the house, and she advised that she did not have a key.
But she says she knows who does.
Pam had overheard a phone call. Jimmy was telling his wife, Carla, that she could come by the house while he was gone to pick up some mail that had come to the house for her. Pam took note that when they left the house, Jimmy didn't leave the mail in the mailbox or on the front door, but he left it inside the house, which told Pam that Carla had a key to the house.
Police believe the killer had a key, but Carla told detectives she didn't have one. The discrepancy raises a red flag.
Is it possible that Carla had a key to the house? How can we prove that she didn't come into the house the night of the murder?
There's only one way to know for sure.
We used the technology of the cell phone pinging to follow her from her work all the way to home.
The cell phone data indicates Carla was home all night, and her daughter Tiffany was too.
Everybody's statements made sense where they were. There was no reason to pursue any other questions with them or Pam at that moment.
Before Carla and Tiffany can be completely ruled out, police must corroborate the calls and texts on their phones with the complete records from the cell companies.
And those can take several days, depending on the circumstance.
A week after the murder, Jimmy's loved ones pay their respects at his funeral.
Jimmy's funeral was held at a local Church of Christ, probably a couple thousand people there. Jimmy touched a lot of people.
Going to Jimmy's funeral was a tough process for myself. So many people loved him.
The mystery of who could have killed Jimmy is on everyone's mind, and grief-stricken loved ones are desperate for answers.
The family was very concerned, but I felt that absolutely the truth would come out.
It was hard waiting and hoping that they get that person before it's too late.
It's very frustrating. After several days, it gets worse. It gets harder to solve, and the family starts to lose hope in you.
The day after the funeral, detectives received the forensics reports.
There was no extra DNA under the fingernails of him to see if he got physically close enough to maybe grab the suspect or anything like that. We didn't get any fingerprints that weren't supposed to be there. Jimmy's prints were the only ones there.
The report isn't all bad news for detectives.
An expert at Nike was able to determine the muddy shoe prints in the entryway of the house. Most likely came from a Nike Air Force One.
These are basketball type shoes. They're between the size 10 and 11.
Before detectives can follow up on this new lead, their investigation takes a bizarre twist.
There had been a scandal at the high school.
Ridgeway High School had a very good basketball team. They were one of the top in the state. We started hearing about a student at the school who had just recently gotten in some trouble.
Detectives need to know if the scandal is linked to Jimmy's murder. Staff tells them the player at the center of the storm is number 22, Mackenzie Sewell.
Obviously, he was a fairly good basketball player, but he was also 2 years older than people that he was playing with. He was actually an adult, falsified documents to still play high school basketball because he was attempting to try to get a scholarship to play.
A week after Jimmy is found dead, the scandal explodes into the headlines.
This man used a fake transcript to enroll here at Ridgeway High, and our sources tell us the man has a GED, but enrolled here simply so he could play basketball.
A humiliated Mackenzie is kicked off the team and out of Ridgeway High.
The dream of the NBA is over. The coaches were like, oh my goodness, because the whole school gets punished for it. They get disqualified from being able to play.
The scandal raises a key question for detectives. Had Jimmy discovered the truth about Mackenzie and been silenced before he could report him to authorities?
Did Jimmy initiate this whole situation? Because we knew Jimmy was an ethical individual. If Mackenzie thought Jimmy had anything to do with this, then this could be a reason why Jimmy was murdered.
Police are eager to talk to Mackenzie, but that's not going to happen.
He immediately lawyered up. He didn't want to talk about anything.
Detectives try a different approach. They go to speak with the person who registered him at Ridgeway High, his mother, Chandra Nicole. What she tells them is more bizarre than they could have imagined.
What we found out is that was his wife.
Detectives hunting the killer of high school basketball coach Jimmy McClain are investigating whether a scandal involving one of his players is linked to his death. Now they discovered that the player's mother is actually his wife. She admits to helping Mackenzie falsify his age, but says it wasn't Jimmy who had discovered the deception.
She had actually called in to say that he was falsifying records, that he wasn't supposed to be in the school because they had gotten into an argument.
While enjoying his second go-around in high school, Mackenzie began a relationship with a fellow student. When his wife caught wind of it, she told the school about Mackenzie's scam.
It was a domestic situation between him and the wife. It really didn't have anything to do with Jimmy. Didn't fall on Jimmy at all.
Once again, a promising lead evaporates into thin air, and over a week into the investigation, police are starting over.
I was back to square one again. I was starting to question myself and wonder, are we going to get anywhere with this thing?
I was starting to be concerned. I wanted to know when people were going to be charged.
Just as investigators begin to fear the trail growing cold, they receive the complete cell phone records for Jimmy's ex-wife, Carla, and her daughter, Tiffany.
We had ordered direct cell phone records to corroborate the exact records that we had initially dumped. You're talking hundreds, even thousands of records at times to look through, to see if you can find where there's a discrepancy in something.
After days of hard work, police get the break they've been praying for.
Everybody else's phones were making sense, but Carla's phone did not make sense. We noticed there were actually people being texted between 6 and 9, 2 different phone numbers. And that was the time frame of the homicide. Those texts were conveniently erased off Carla's phone. So that automatically piqued interest. So we're trying to identify the 2 phone numbers that were deleted. And we identified one of them as a subject named Robert, and then another subject named Heather. We looked up Robert real quick and found out Robert was a convicted felon for dope dealing. But why are these numbers erased the night of the murder? At that point, I felt it necessary to call Carla back in and talk to her again, and then further identify maybe Heather and Robert since we had names on them.
When detectives press Carla about the texts, she tells them they belong to her son and Jimmy's former stepson, Dwayne. Detectives already know that Dwayne uses his mom's phone since he doesn't own one of his own.
Carla said that Heather was a girlfriend. She says, oh, she's a good girl. She's a girl that lives out in Cordova, not too far. Carla said wasn't too fond of Robert, but she did admit he and Dwayne were friends. She says, well, I don't really like him hanging out with Robert too much. You know, he's a troublemaker.
Knowing that Dwayne was texting with a known felon during the time frame of Jimmy's murder is a red flag for detectives. So they asked Dwayne to join his mom down at the station.
The way we approached Dwayne was like, hey, we're having to kind of start over and get a more detailed events of the night. And he advised when his mom got home, he had the phone, he spoke with one of his friends, and then Heather came over.
When detectives finish with Carla and Dwayne, they quickly contact Heather to see if she can confirm Dwayne's story.
She said, I went to Dwayne's house that evening, later that evening. So she has confirmed that she went over there.
It seems like it's another dead end. Yet when detectives follow up with a question about the basketball shoe print found at the crime scene, the interview takes a promising turn.
We asked about the shoes, and she said, oh, Dwayne has these Air Force Ones, and he wears a size 10.5, which fit the crime scene. And at that point, she said, and I remember seeing those Air Force Ones out on the porch, but I hadn't seen them since then. She said, I even have a picture of them. And when she showed a picture, it was a picture of Dwayne staying in the kitchen with a AR-15 rifle and these Air Force Ones.
Police quickly get a search warrant for Carla's home.
Searching the closets and everything else, so there's no Air Force Ones in there. There's no shoes that matched the homicide. Took pictures of his room, and we left. We didn't come out at that house with anything.
So far, linking Dwayne to the crime has not proven fruitful. But detectives have another strategy.
We know for a fact that there was text messages between Robert and Dwayne during the homicide. We feel that those texts could be very important. Since he'd erased them off his phone, we couldn't get them. So my goal was to get a search warrant for Robert's phone, hoping that the text messages were still on his phone, visible where we could see them.
While police wait for a warrant to be approved, officers keep an eye on Robert.
I arrived, and within a few hours of setting up surveillance, Robert Collins came out of his house.
At that point, our detectives went to talk to him, and Robert took off running.
Detectives investigating the murder of Jimmy McClain believe text on the phone of convicted felon Robert Collins may point to the killer.
When Robert took off running, he ran a good ways, but we needed to catch him. We didn't want him to destroy his phone or anything like that.
As Robert Collins was running away from the scene, he tossed something.
Our detectives ended up catching him on foot, and when they did, he had a large amount of narcotics.
The illegal drugs give detectives reason to arrest Robert. But even more incriminating is what he tried to discard as he fled.
When we saw that he had tossed a weapon, we immediately thought maybe that was the weapon that was involved.
So in the back of my head, I'm thinking, oh, this is fantastic. Are we going to solve the homicide right now? You get excited, like, hey, we're there, we're going to get this.
Police bring Robert down to the station. But before they question him, they carefully examine his gun and phone.
I think it was very quickly determined it wasn't the weapon from the scene.
Still, detectives have plenty of leverage on Robert.
He's a felon convicted with a handgun. Now he's got another handgun on him and a large amount of drugs. This could easily go federal. Maybe that could help us out. Maybe he'd want to work something out. He wouldn't budge on anything. I don't want to talk to y'all. Basically, he said, just put me in the jail cell. I'll go do my time. You just don't get that. That's just not normal.
Is Robert trying to protect his buddy, Dwayne, or just himself? If he won't give anything up, detectives hope his cell phone might.
I was hoping that the text messages were still on his phone. Started going through it. Well, Robert had erased his text too. But what Robert didn't erase were some pictures that we were able to get. The day before the homicide, Robert on his phone had a picture of a handgun. It is a similar gun, a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson Sigma, the same caliber used. What was unique about the handgun was not the handgun itself, but where the handgun was laying. And it was laying on a very unique bedspread. When I saw the bedspread, I was like, I've seen that bedspread before. I said, go get the search warrant pictures from when we picked Dwayne up. Well, as we scrolled through more pictures, we finally found a deleted picture that had Dwayne in front of the bedspread. So it tied it all in with the gun and the picture.
Police now know the gun likely belonged to Dwayne or someone in his inner circle. But who used it to gun Jimmy down in cold blood? Detectives hope to find out from Robert himself.
So when we put Robert in jail, We were hoping Robert would say something on the phone. The first phone call that Robert made was to a young guy. First thing that Robert said to the guy was, "Hey man, that pit bull, it's real sick." And the guy kind of like, I don't think he caught what he was saying. He's like, "Oh yeah," just laughing, I got you. And Robert, you could see, was very frustrated. Like, "No man, I'm not kidding. You need to get rid of that pit bull. It's sick. Bryce shouldn't have sold it to you." We did have indication that pit bull was most likely the gun.
And real sick, put it in street terms, means it has a body on it.
Detectives traced the owner of the phone Robert called.
It was a kid named Jamarius that lived in the Cordova area.
We believe that Jamarius Cooper had in his possession the firearm that was used in the killing of Jimmy McClain.
Police get an emergency search warrant and race over to Jamarius' home before he can dispose of the gun.
When we got Jamarius Cooper's bedroom, we systematically started going through places that things could be hidden.
We were going through it, and we weren't finding anything. And then one of my detectives, probably into the 30th box or so, he's like, "I got something." And I was like, "Do what?"
When I saw that gun, I immediately felt like we had found the needle in the haystack. We had known through this investigation that most likely we were looking for a very specific gun. That is the same style gun that we're looking for. Same caliber, most likely the same brand, the same model.
At that moment, I was like, "Jimmy's here. He's guiding us. He's telling us it's all here. He's not making it easy. He's making this puzzle, but it's slowly coming together." So immediately took the gun and had TBI process it. Within a couple hours, they were calling us back on, "Hey, this is the gun that was used in the homicide of Jimmy McClain." That does bring some emotion to you. You're like, "Oh my gosh, this work, this time, and we're going into 30 days here. Nobody finds a gun used in a homicide in 30 days.
Police need to talk to Jamarius, but before they can track him down, they get an alarming call.
We have a call from Cumberland County Sheriff's Office, and the deputy there said, "Hey, listen, we just had something weird come in. A white female came running into our station. She was very distraught. She was in her pajamas, and that she said that she wanted to pass on some information that her husband was upset because his nephew had admitted to killing a basketball coach."
Detectives investigating the murder of Jimmy McClain have just received an unexpected call from a sheriff's office 5 hours away.
And the deputy there said, "A white female came running into our station. Her husband was upset because his nephew had admitted to killing a basketball coach." Her husband was Carla's brother, which was Dwayne's uncle.
Detectives are stunned. Dwayne's uncle is Donald Page, a known felon. Detectives bring him in, knowing they may only have one shot to get him to talk.
He was "I'm not talking to y'all, I ain't got nothing to say."
Police remind him of one simple fact. If he's withholding information, that makes him an accessory to murder.
And all of a sudden, he said, "Look, my nephew said he did it."
Dwayne had, in fact, taken him aside and said, Unc, I had to handle my business. And Donald said he looked at him and said, "Are you saying that you killed him?" Dwayne said to him, "I had to stand up for my mom."
Dwayne, he loved his mom. They were having some financial issues, and Dwayne thought that if this divorce could just be done with, I could get the money from the house. And I think Dwayne took it upon himself to do whatever he wanted to do, and which unfortunately led to the homicide.
There was tension between Jimmy and Dwayne already. So there was that divorce, money, financial implication, motive.
With an accessory charge hanging over his head, Donald agrees to testify against his nephew.
At that point, I called the prosecutor and told him what we had, and he said, I think it's time to go lock up Dwayne Moore for homicide.
On March 26, 2013, Dwayne Moore is charged with the murder of his own stepfather.
I'm telling you, he just had no remorse, no confessions. He just didn't have any care in the world whatsoever.
When I heard Dwayne had been charged with Jimmy's murder, I felt a lot of relief.
I was shocked to know that someone that he had influenced this long in this young man's life that would take his life.
It went deep to my core as far as emotionally. This was unbelievable because of who Jimmy was.
14 months later, Dwayne Moore stands before the Memphis judge and jury. The prosecution lays out what they believe happened the night of the murder.
Dwayne had it in his head that he was going over there to kill him. He knew that there was a key to the house that Carla might have forgot about. I think he waited until he saw Jimmy pull in, let himself in that front door. Pulled the gun out as soon as he saw Jimmy and started shooting. I think he did it in about 5 minutes at the most. I think he just went in there and started blasting away.
To try to imagine what Jimmy must have gone through in the final moments that he was living is extremely painful. The awful terror he must have felt, knowing that his life was about to end.
On June 27, 2014, Dwayne Moore is convicted and sentenced to 22 years in prison without the possibility of parole.
It hurts. It hurts that somebody thought so little of my family, that they could take somebody so precious to us.
While Jimmy's family still misses him every day, his love for educating young people lives on.
To honor Jimmy's memory, we established a scholarship in his name at the University of Arkansas at Conway.
I think Jimmy would want to be remembered by being a godly man, a kind man, and a peaceful man.
That's what helps me to try to let the anger go. Don't be mad. Just thank God that he was here and that he was my brother for as long as he was. I miss him and I love him.
For more information on an unexpected killer, go to oxygen.com.
Xin chào tất cả các bạn, hôm nay mình sẽ tô bức tranh nhật vào cho mình nhé.
Nó phải làm nhá. Có việc phải làm. Không mừng áng thôi. Sướng.
Em còn quên cái này nữa. Qua đây.
Kiểm tra.
Bàn tay em bị chóc ra kìa.
Anh bị lần này xưa hết những cái này đi. Anh bị mà.